the way Facebook does. Oh, balls. Oh, we're going to be a little late. We are fighting the tech today. I appear to have a buzzing in my ear too, and I don't know where that's coming from. Hopefully, you're not hearing that.
I can't hear anything on my end.
Good, because I got a buzzing in my ear. I don't know where that's coming from. Let's see. Okay, beauty. Sorry, everything's going pear-shaped here.
No worries.
Apparently, it's a little bit my fault. If I come up here too early, I tend to play with things and mess things up. I'm going to improve this. I'm going to fix this. Except I rarely, if ever, do. And um, I rarely, if ever, do that. And I so that gets me in trouble. But then also, this particular week, I happened to forget that we had a power outage here during the week, and that played with everything. So
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure. It could also be that. Nope. A little bit. A little bit. Might have been that. I just unplugged.
Well, I am
I just
technologically.
unplugged. I just unplugged Kristen's computer. Sorry, sweetie, if you're listening, but I'm getting a buzz from somewhere, and I thought it might be your computer.
Well, Jeff, I am unfortunately technologically inept and would only make things worse. So I'll let you figure
No,
that all
we're
out.
sharing now. We're just a little bit back from where we should be,
Okay.
but I don't know where that buzzing is coming from. Hopefully, folks aren't getting that. I believe I just let George in. I hope. That was the plan. Yeah, there's a hell of a buzz coming from somewhere. It is probably a feedback. A little EM laying over something else. But we shall keep calm and carry on, as it were. Then I started sharing them. I forgot to change the privacy settings. That's never a good thing. Oh, God. Just another fantastic evening. Yeah. Shall I go into the one last conservative group that allows me in? Do that. Almost there. Gosh, I got a lot of groups. Wouldn't be here without you, gang. Blimey. And there we go. That's kind of how it's going today. Oh, yeah. That's how we do it. That's how it's going today. And it might not stay. Because I bumped a wire. Awesome. Woo! I'll have to let George do the rest of the sharing since I've been blocked. What a surprise. Hey, let's have some fun, shall we? A bit late, but let's have at it. Bring that up, hit you, and we're not playing. We're supposed to have a theme song that isn't playing. Oh, good. Everything's going great, gang. Oh, there she goes. Hello. Better late than never.
Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. Do you want a man for president who's seasoned through and through, but not so doggone seasoned that he won't try something new? A man who's old enough to know
and young enough to do.
Well, it's up to you, it's up to you. It's strictly up to you. But it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. Do you want a man with spirit who is not afraid to fight?
A man whose record shows that he will fight for what is right.
A loyal man who brings the job a fresh new point of view. Well, it's up to you, it's up to you. It's strictly up to you. Because it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. And do you deny to any man the right he's guaranteed to be elected president, no matter what his creed?
It's promised in the Bill of Rights to which we must be true.
So it's up to you, it's up to you. It's strictly up to you. And it's Kennedy, 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 for me. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. Do you like a man who answers straight, a man who's always fair? We'll measure him against the others, and when you compare, you'll cast your vote for Kennedy and a change that's overdue. So it's up to you, it's up to you, it's strictly up to you. Yes, it's Kennedy, 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 for me. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy,
Welcome from my humble second bedroom here in the Saucon Valley, part of the Lehigh Valley in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, part of these United States, North American continent, Western Hemisphere on this planet Earth. The only one. We have third rock from the sun in the Terran solar system, part of the Milky Way galaxy. This is the Kennedy Effect live with you for the 24th of September, 2023. And a bloody rainy one, if I'm being honest with you. It is absolutely soaked outside. Now, I consider myself somewhat of an environmentalist. I am not perfect. I have a Jeep. I don't always get my plastic bottle into the recycling bin, but I do my best. I do know the difference between weather and climate. If you've never seen the excellent video of Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson from Cosmos walking the dog on the beach describing the difference between weather and climate, you may not know what I'm discussing, but there is a difference between weather and climate. So, that said, very, very selfishly, it has been raining here in the Lehigh Valley essentially nonstop since about, I think, 6 a.m. yesterday morning. And it is scheduled to rain, I believe, into tomorrow. And we should end up with, I think, 5 inches of rain. And it's the kind of rain that, actually into the afternoon tomorrow, so quite wet yet. It's actually the kind of rain that I tend to talk about that we don't get anymore. Steady, sometimes a little light, sometimes a little heavy, thoroughly soaking the ground actually absorbing most of it instead of these monstrous downpours that we usually get now. And it's been actually kind of nice in a very strange way to have this. Yet, very selfishly, I must protest Mother Nature. You've robbed me of one of my favorite weekends of the year, if not my single favorite weekend of the year, and that is the Celtic Classic and Highland Games in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where there's lots of wonderful, wonderful festivals throughout the Lehigh Valley. Fantastic. Celtic Fest is the one for this Irish guy. Celtic Fest is the one that puts me over the top. It's the one I desperately look forward to every year. It's the one that I will schedule around to make sure that I can attend. Chris and I were very lucky with some of our friends that we could sneak in a bit of it. On Friday night, we got in a couple of hours of it, and you should think to yourself, well, geez, a couple of hours is not enough. Maybe, if you're boring. But, there's always more. And I couldn't go the entire weekend, and I have to say, I felt so bad for all of the vendors and musicians and everyone that, schedules themselves around working this event and being at this event and hopefully making a few bucks, to be honest, and it just didn't work out that way, and it's a shame, and I'm not happy. That said, Oktoberfest is in 2 weeks, so we'll just have to have a pint there, shall we? And we'll have sausages there, won't we? I know this might come out wrong. I really hope this doesn't come out wrong, but it was interesting. Friday night, I got home from work. We threw some different clothes on, took off, straight up to where the festival is. And neither of us had eaten all day. So that's it. I'm getting myself a pint of fish and chips, and we're going to sit and listen to some music. Well, the line at the fish and chip shop was, as you would imagine, lengthy at best. Interestingly, though, the Greek gyro booth was not terribly busy. And I thought to myself, quite right, as it should be. It's a Celtic Fest, isn't it? So it shouldn't be that busy, should it? Excellent. Now, all the Greeks out there are going to be mad at me, but I'm just saying, if it was a Greek festival, the fish and chip shop should be dead. Do you know what I mean? What comes around goes around. That said, let's get to it. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Now, we have shared the program. I'm sure this will come as a terrible, terrible shock to you all if you are regular listeners or viewers of the program. I was able to share the program out to about 102 different places before anyone? Yes, before Facebook stopped me yet again from sharing my own program. About 7:15 or so, I'll be able to get it out to the rest of the places. So if you are part of the 102 places that we have shared the program so far this week, thank you, thank you, thank you. We could not do it without you. Every single individual, every single page, group page, public page, private page, national page, you name it, if you allow us to be a little bit a part of your Facebook corner of the universe, we are infinitely grateful to you. We could not do it without you. We could not be here if you are not there. However, if you'd like to come over to our home group Facebook page or my own personal timeline, I think we're referring to it these days, I will see your comments. I see Patricia is already here, who waited patiently as I fought with my sign that fell down and the fact that I've got reverb in my head and the headache I should have by 9 o'clock should be epic. And the fact that there seems to be a buzz somewhere around here, but Patricia sat through all of the nastiness of the beginnings of the program. So we appreciate that. Come on over to my own personal Facebook, Jeff Kennedy, or our home group Facebook page, That Other Side of Information. I should see all of your comments, questions, if you have any. You can be part of the conversation here on the program live in real time. We are also, of course, live on our YouTube channel, which I'm watching over here on this fancy piece of metal over here to my left to keep an eye on both. We will see your comments and questions on the screen. Thank you for checking us out. If you ever miss any of the program, best place to find us is right over there, youtube.com/that other side of information. That said, hot101.net, our name is our web address, and we are very proud to be on on a part of the Hot101.net family and on the airwaves of Hot101.net yet again this week, literally around the globe. If you have any type of device that can connect to the internet, you can listen to Hot101.net. Our name is our web address, but you can also listen through our apps: Apple App Store for an Apple device, Google Play Store for Android, and the Tune in radio app. You can also tell Alexa to play Hot101.net. So for those of you in the Asia Pacific area where it's already Monday morning, all the way here to us in the United States where it is still only 3:15 Pacific time, welcome, welcome, welcome to the entire planet Earth here on Hot101.net. And we're also part of the TCP Media Group and happy to be with them yet again this week. And let's not forget, of course, the people who make this program partly they're responsible in part for this program, how dare they, would be the PayGive app. A cash app, a financial transaction app. You have to buy things, and when you buy them, you have to pay for them. Well, if you have to pay for things, you can actually designate a percentage of your transaction to a charity or even a political candidate of your choosing. PayGive app, paygive.org. You have to pay for things. Why not give while you do it? Let's get to it. She has been exceptionally patient, but then again, she can be. She's a lot younger than me. She's got lots of time to sit and listen to me prattle and plither on, doesn't she? Our guest is Kait Ahern, president of the College Democrats here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Kait, and my friend, which is probably on her entire list of accomplishments at the ripe old age of 24 or 25, is exceptionally low on that list. That would be, of all the things as far as college graduate, this, that, grade point, all these accomplishments, way, way, way down, off the page. Below the fold, as we used to say in the old days on the newspaper, would be my friend, and a very integral part, shall I say, of the Pennsylvania Democratic Progressive Caucus. No underestimates there. Let's be honest. Even just saying massively integral is probably an understatement. An exceptionally important part of it. We welcome Kait to the program. Kait, welcome to the program.
Thank you for the very kind introduction, Jeff. I will correct you on one thing. I'm actually a much younger spring chicken. I'm 23. Yeah.
I vaguely, when I was 23, not only do we not have electronic devices in color, I think I saw in black and white. I think the entire world was still black and white. I remember the stone tablets George and I used to trade back and forth for messages, things like that. None of this fancy computing crap that we have now. Anyway, I should say crap after a start like today, isn't it? But anyway, let us begin the way that we welcome all new guests to the program, and that is with our standard opening question for new guests. Who is Kait Ahern, and how did you get here?
What a great open-ended question. Who am I? Well, I suppose I will start by saying that I am the outgoing president of the Pennsylvania College Democrats. I am a youth organizer. I have done quite a bit of work outside of the partisan sphere. So I'm very interested in youth voter engagement and just making sure that young people across the board have access to voting, to democratic resources, to engaging with their government. So I have done quite a bit of work in that realm. And as Jeff mentioned earlier, I also do quite a bit of work focusing on the democratic political side of things. So I have worked for a few United States congressional races. And yeah, that is how I have gotten my work started for me as a young adult in politics. Jeff, is there anything else you'd like me to?
Nope, that's it. We're all good. Done. Excellent. We've wrapped up. Excellent. Why be involved? What did it? Have you been this way since you were younger? I ran for my first office when I was 5 years old. I've told the story here many, many times. I lost, and I've been running ever since. It's kind of what Kennedys do. We run, and except the good Kennedys win. I didn't. That said, why get involved? Why even bother with any of this? There's a lot of things you could be doing. There's a lot of things that folks your age, which even when I just said folks your age, boy, did I sound old saying that. But there's a lot of different things that your age group can and probably should be worried about. Why politics? Why policy? Why issues? Why even get involved in the first place?
So, Jeff, I will start off my answer by saying that I'm a bit of a history buff, and I will recount one of my favorite historical stories to answer this. So, the year is 1787, and the place is Independence Hall, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The Constitutional Convention has just met and convened, and they have decided upon the system of governance that is going to govern the fledgling United States of America. And Benjamin Franklin, who is one of the delegates, exits the building. He exits Independence Hall. And standing outside is a crowd of people waiting for the delegates to exit. And a woman famously approaches Benjamin Franklin, and she says, "Dr. Franklin, what do we have? A monarchy or a republic?" And he responds, "A republic if you can keep it." And that is something I think that has really stuck with me. Those words are very powerful words, right? We have a democracy, a republic in the United States, and it's a living, breathing system of government. It's not something that could be left to the wayside to, survive on its own. A democracy is only as strong as the people who are upkeeping it. And America has done an exceptionally well job of keeping this republic for all of its existence, right? We have kept it through the battlefields of Gettysburg, all the way to the streets of Selma and the halls of the Seneca Fall Convention, right? We have had an exceptionally engaged body of people living in this great country. And I am very glad to count myself among those engaged citizens of America. And I do think that we all have a responsibility to keep this republic, right? So that's one of the reasons why I get and stay involved with politics.
Is there any seminal moment that you can think of, even when you were younger, that you said this isn't quite right, or maybe even on the opposite end, this is a good thing and I need to stand up for this? Is there one particular thing, or is it a culmination of perhaps influence from your parents, that historical education, which is beyond refreshing to hear? Yes, folks, there was a United States before 1980. I swear to God there was. It's one of the great things about the sequential Gregorian calendar is that it is in sequence. There were presidents before Reagan. There was a nation before Reagan. But that said, is there any particular seminal moment that you kind of either watched a news story on the TV, or read that certain article, studied that certain class, and thought to yourself, this, either this isn't quite right, or actually this is a really great thing, but not enough people know about it, so I'm going to make it my mission?
Yeah, actually, there is one specific moment that I could look back on. So I am from the greatest little corner of the world, Scranton, Pennsylvania. And growing up, I lived about 2 miles away from one of the biggest landfills in the United States of America. And I very much did not like this landfill, right? I would consider myself to be an environmentalist, at least a conservationist. And it was not only an eyesore to the people of my community, it is an environmental hazard. And we did not like having it much in our backyard. And I remember being about 12 years old, and there were all of these city council meetings, and they would be held to determine whether or not the borough that I lived in was going to expand the landfill. And I thought to myself, I should go and speak out against this. Now, that is not something that was exactly encouraged by my parents. They did not want me going and
That sounds familiar.
causing a ruckus.
Yeah.
I had family members that worked at the landfill, and I was more or less softly advised by my family to not cause a problem for anyone. But I did. As a 12-year-old who very much wanted to protect the environment, I did go and cause problems. I remember sneaking out and attending some of these borough council meetings, and I would speak out against this landfill. And I would consistently be the youngest person there by a comfortable 3 decades, I would say. And I will never forget, I spoke at one of these meetings, and it was quite patronizing, the response that I got. It wasn't aggressive or, it wasn't antagonistic towards me, but the borough council members spoke to me as though I was a child, which I was, but also that my opinion did not matter because I was young, because I was a child. And they basically said that I should come back when I'm a little bit older. So here I am, a little bit older, and I am still causing problems, as John Lewis would say, getting into good trouble. And that was a formative moment for me, realizing that people did not really respect or heed the opinions of the younger generation. So now I'm ensuring that younger people all across Pennsylvania and across the United States of America will have their voices be heard.
It strikes me that your generation is often used as cannon fodder.
Mm-hmm.
You can serve in the military. Poor young kids are strongly encouraged to serve in the military, and they do in great numbers with tremendous, tremendous honor. I did not serve, therefore I feel no judgment to say whether someone should serve or not. But you're also used as a form of political cannon fodder insofar as that you're often referred to as, we have to do this thing, fill in the blank. We have to do X policy for our children and grandchildren. And then when you try to exercise your own constitutional rights and actually stand up for yourself, you're patronized. And I think that your age group continues to be patronized. Why do you suppose that is? Or is it just political expediency? Or do my generation, which is strange because when I do tend to see folks on, tend to see, House members and senators on television, even if they are my age, I tend to think of them as older for some reason. Maybe because they're the ones on television and I'm not. But that said, do you think you are a bit of a political cannon fodder? Do you think it's just political expediency? Because it just sounds good, our children and grandchildren, but then when you try to exercise yourselves, you're shot down. What do you see behind that kind of confluence?
I think that goes hand in hand with the age-old saying that young people don't vote and that young people don't care about politics, about democracy, which I believe could not be further from the truth, right? And this is not a new idea that is just applied to my generation. Jeff, it was applied to your generation when you were the youth voting bloc. It was applied to the youth generation in the 1920s, in the silent generation, right? Which is now, today, our oldest living voting bloc. And you see this, it's very interesting if anyone ever takes the time to go through the archives of a newspaper like the New York Times. You can actually see this. If you search up young voters or young people politics, you will see these articles that the same thing has been said over the past 100, 150 years about young people. And it really couldn't be further from the truth. Young people have always been engaged, right? You had, for example, the Vietnam War protests. You had the environmental rights protests with the formation of the Environmental Protection Agency. You had things more recently.
The first Earth Day.
The first Earth Day. You had things a little more recent, like the Occupy Wall Street movement, or even the Me Too movement was largely spearheaded by young people in the United States and beyond. And so you really see that young people have tended to be cannon fodder for quite some time as far as politics goes. And part of that is that young people have tended to vote at much lower rates. That is just an unfortunate truth that has existed and persisted throughout American history. For example, in 2014, I believe the youth voting rate was 17%, and it had been lower than that in years prior. The wonderful thing about my generation is that not only are we politically and civically engaged like other youth generations before us, my generation is actually getting out and voting at unprecedented rates, unprecedented high rates, I should say. It's not lower than what we had in 2014, it's much higher. In the 2022 midterm elections, youth voting sat at a comfortable 27%, and it had been higher than that a few years earlier at upwards of 32%. The United States has never seen youth voting rates that high since we actually extended the right to vote to 18-year-olds in 1971. So this is very new. This is a very new and very recent development. But Jeff, I think it plays into the fact that young people may not have voted at rates that were considered high in the past, and people did not necessarily respect the other civic contributions they were making. Say a protest, right? It's not seen as being equal to voting. And now we might start seeing perhaps a shift now that young people are voting at rates that are considered to be very high for the first time in our nation's history.
What do you think has spurred some of that new, if it is new, engagement, or shall we say the higher levels of engagement? Is it what I would respectfully say finally coming to the realization that, yeah, there's more of us than them? I've told this, made a allegory here on the program way too many times if you're a consistent viewer and or listener. Mr. Bezos may have more money than God, but at the end of the day, when he walks in the booth, he has one vote. And if he's in a room of 100 people, there's still only one of him and 99 of the rest of us. Has your voting bloc, your age group, your generation, I would, again, risk being condescending and saying finally realized that, yeah, when we show up, things happen?
So I would say that is absolutely part of it, but there are other things that we can't discount as well. For example, the advancements in general voter rights. So one of the best markers of whether or not young people are going to vote is if the voting process is made easy to them. So in Pennsylvania, for those who do not live in this state, one of the wonderful things that our governor has recently done is enact automatic voter registration. So now when somebody living in the state goes to register themselves or get a license at our license centers, they will automatically become a registered voter. Now, for those who also are not familiar, the process to register as a voter is sometimes very complicated. It's not necessarily the easiest thing for a new and young voter to understand. And for a lot of these voters, it's not that they would not like to vote. It's just done in a very complicated, messy way. And it's more hassle than maybe they're willing to put into it. Something like automatic voter registration starts knocking down that barrier. And there are other laws as well that could help young people get better access to the polls. One other thing that is a marker for whether or not a young person is going to vote is actually college education. And the unique thing about my generation is that it is actually geared to be the most college educated group of voters that America has ever seen. Millennials currently have more college degrees than my generation, Gen Z, has, but many people in Gen Z are currently not old enough to be in college. If the trends continue and Gen Z continues to go to college to the degree that they have already been going to college, they will surpass millennials. And that is another marker of whether or not a person is going to vote. One other thing is something called habitual voting. So if you have voted in the past, you are much, much more likely to go out and vote again. You've already done it. You've been to the polls. You've seen the process happen already. And it is one of the most persistent markers of whether or not a young person is going to vote again. So if you have a young loved one, or if you are yourself a young person, try to get them to the polls just once, and they will become exponentially much more likely to go out and vote a second, third, fourth time. Just getting them out that first time, it does make a massive difference as to whether or not they'll do it again in the future. It's just habitual voting.
Yeah, I've told the story here before that my father took me with him to vote when I was, gosh, I probably couldn't have been any older than 7, I don't think. And in New Jersey, we got full sample ballots sent to us by the Department of State. Our county office, our local office, of course, all were involved in that. You get a full paper sample ballot that when you almost looked like a map by the time you unfolded the old thing. It took up half the kitchen table, and my father brought me out to the kitchen and sat me down and said, now we're going to go through the ballot. And we went through the ballot. And, you know, we looked at the different candidates. We read the interpretive statements of the ballot questions, and he literally filled it in with a pencil. We folded it back up. He said, okay, we're going to keep this right here till election day, and then we'll get back to it. And then election day came, and he said, come on, we're going to vote. Took our sample ballot with us, went to the polling place, realized that he already knew everybody at the polling place, which I think is always a fun thing, that you see these folks twice a year, you know, but they tend to remember you and you remember them. And we went to vote and went in the booth and did our voting and so on. And by the time we were done, he said to me, I'm skipping part of the story because it's a bit redundant, but he said to me, now that wasn't too bad, was it? And I said, no, it was pretty quick. He goes, and he told me, he said, there's no reason, none, that you can't set aside about a half an hour a year to do this. At most, maybe an hour a year. The primary and the general. Every single year. And actually, in New Jersey, we didn't have elections every single year, as we do seem to here. But because it's an hour a year. And as we left, he said, it's not just that it's an hour a year. He goes, it's your civic duty to do it. You don't get to complain if you don't take part in the process. You can't complain about government when you take no role in it. And then he said to me, which I think is a dire warning for our current times, never let them take it from you. If your vote didn't count, nobody would ever try to take it from you. They would want to keep it from you because it does count. Because your vote is important. Why do you suppose that general message, not necessarily, certainly in my father's words, my late father's words, but why do you suppose that general message, that general idea of that this is not difficult, it's an hour a year, every year, has been one that has been kind of hard to get through, not just to your younger generation, but to consecutive younger generations. My generation didn't vote either. I voted. I was told to. I was taught to. But generally speaking, when my generation was your age, we didn't vote in large numbers either. Why do you suppose it's always been, or traditionally been, a difficult thing to get younger folks to vote?
So I am myself a campaign staffer, so I say this with a grain of salt. It's it might not be. I would hope to say that this is an accurate reflection of what I think is a large part of the problem. But I think campaigns have largely failed young people. I think they really have. Young people are left out of campaigning quite a bit. They are not on, if anyone here has volunteered for a political campaign, you make phone calls, you go knock on doors, right? And in current times, you might send out an email, you might send out a text message. And young people are largely left out of those phone banking lists. They are not called. I tell this story all the time, but I was working on a campaign in Georgia in 2020, and I actually had more people over the age of 100 that were on my list of voters to call than I ever did voters under the age of 20 years old. And I tell that story quite a bit because I actually started tallying it up because I thought to myself, this can't be the case. There are many more 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds than there are voters over the age of 100. But they just did not appear on those lists of voters to contact and call. In fact, in 2018, over 40% of Gen Z, my generation, said they had never been contacted by a political campaign. 40% of the entire generation, right? Likewise, only about, I'm trying to remember these numbers, it was about 14 or 15% of the generation that same year had said when they were contacted by a campaign, they received relevant information on how to register, how to get to the polls, which polls they should be using. So for new voters, there are these barriers that might not exist for a voter who is 50 years old, who knows which polls to go to and is well aware that they have been registered to vote, right? When you are trying to become a first-time voter, there are these barriers that do not exist for older voters. And on top of that, you have the fact that campaigns aren't contacting young voters at all. They're kind of ignored and left to their own devices. And so you get the young voters who are already very passionate about civics. They already want to go out and vote. You know, they have these issues that are very important to them. And those are the ones that end up going to vote. So it's not everyone in the generation that is given this information equally. The other thing I would like to mention that I think sets my generation aside from the past youth generations before is social media, right? So I see someone in the comments has left a comment that civics is not taught at every high school, which is the unfortunate truth, right? The things that should be taught to young people when they go through education about how they could register, what their civic duty, their civic responsibility is. Unfortunately, that's not being taught to every student at every school. So there are people that fall through the cracks. And having something like social media where you can easily access this information without going to college, without having a loved one who is civically enthusiastic or engaged, right? You could now be anybody exposed to that information naturally in a very easy, free, and accessible way. And that isn't something that younger generations before my generation had access to. And I do think that that is increasing the number of young people that are choosing to get involved at a younger age.
It's another something that my father taught me, and it's kind of funny, not not comically funny, but ironically funny in my in my particular point of view. It is sadly funny how much I actually learned from my father. I think sometimes we tend to take that for granted until they're not there anymore. But I never realized, I don't think, how much I absorbed from him until he wasn't here anymore. But one of the things that he taught me was that that it's not very hard to be it's not very hard to be involved, and it's not very hard to be educated. boy, do I miss that man. Hope he knows that it's not hard to be informed. It doesn't take a lot of effort to be informed. And at the risk of asking you to answer a question that you just asked, it is a bit easier. You could just watch. Well, at that point, you didn't even have to read the paper cover to cover the way he did, or watch every news broadcast the way he did. But it is, you can just pick it up on these funny devices that have more computing power in them than the space shuttle, right here. And I can be informed if I choose to be so. How much do you think, is there any way to quantify how much that's changed things for your generation compared to others? And then, of course, there's the entire branch off of that question, I suppose, of our ability to be informed has grown exponentially, but our ability to be misinformed has also grown exponentially.
Yes. So I would say there is no definitive way to quantify how much that has revolutionized youth voting. I think there's a whole lot of factors that have impacted this generation voting. The internet is certainly one of them. What I will say is, you just mentioned, flipping through the paper and getting all of your information from there, or even watching, cable news. My generation does not do either of those things. It's only about 2% of the generation that reads physical newspapers. I fall into that category, and I, trust me when I say, am in the very small minority. Most people just get their information from social media, and it is, like Jeff mentioned, it has been a wonderful innovation, but it has also introduced us to a lot of misinformation and disinformation. Likewise, only about 5% of my entire generation actually watches cable news networks, which I will say are pundits, right? So you don't really get news from those channels anyways, unless you are watching a regional or a local news station. I would say it's mostly turned into partisan spectacles, or a talk show, right? It's wonderful to watch people that you agree with talk about things that you agree with, but I wouldn't necessarily categorize that as being news either. I do think, reading newspapers would be an ideal way to be getting this information. Unfortunately, a lot of places in the United States are now news deserts. We have local newspapers dying off at unprecedented rates. My own local newspaper, which I love very dearly, it has actually just been bought out by a national news corporation that is now going to be, I guess, operating the paper. I'm not quite sure what impact that's going to have on the journalism yet, but it's very sad that we have this happening all across America. And like Jeff said, as wonderful as social media is to get this information to people quickly, it's not information from reliable sources. There's no way to vet who's saying anything. There's no credentials behind what anybody is saying. And it's spread very quickly. It is spread like a wildfire. And when you do have misinformation or disinformation, it becomes a very dangerous tool when wielded by people who do not have good intentions. I'll leave it, I'll say it lightly, but that's my thoughts on that, Jeff.
There's an old saying that I've never found to be true, to be quite honest, but it has become a bit of a, I wouldn't want to say it's a stereotype, but I think it's become all too convenient of a saying that when you're young, if you're not liberal, and then as you get older, if you don't become conservative, then you're not paying attention. Is there any truth to that to you? Or have you ever heard that one before? That's an old one, but
I've certainly heard it. I have certainly heard that one.
Butchered it. I probably quite butchered it. But the general
it is
idea
something
is.
that I've heard. I will say, and this is fascinating to me at least, there seems to be a few differences in Gen Z, in this new youth generation, that we haven't necessarily seen with youth generations before. One of them being that there seems to be quite a few universal policy points that young people agree on, regardless of which party they belong to. So there are young liberals and there are young conservatives. And across the board, roughly 2/3 of the entire generation says that they recognize social inequality and racial inequality as a political issue that is currently facing America. And over half of my generation actually attributes climate change to human activity. Now, what's so interesting about this is when you look at older conservatives, those are absolutely not policy points that they would consider themselves to agree with. Let's
I
see.
believe your generation is also relatively uniform in its desire and feeling that there are simply too few rich people and that they hold entirely too much wealth and that the tax system is fundamentally unfair and that the tax the rich movement is actually makes quite a bit of sense.
Yeah, it is very interesting that there is oftentimes solidarity between I should say the moderate conservatives, and I would say the moderate young liberals, right? And just to add on to that as well, nearly half of Republican members of Gen Z, and these are people who have affiliated themselves with the Republican Party as they registered to vote, actually agree that Black Americans face racial discrimination. And they also are much more likely to support the legalization of recreational marijuana, believe that the government should, quote, do more to solve problems, and be more accepting of gay Americans. Now, I'm mentioning these things because Jeff had said, as you get older, if you don't become conservative, you're not paying attention, right? It's something that seems to happen as voters get older regardless. But these new young conservatives, I should say the moderate ones at least, do seem to agree on a few surprising policy points with these young moderate liberals. And I say surprising because if you just heard the policy points that I listed off, those are absolutely deal breakers for a lot of older conservatives. So it will be very curious, Jeff, to see what happens with my generation. And if, the new Republican Party of tomorrow, for example, looks a little different than the one we have today, and if the new Democratic Party of tomorrow looks a little different than the one we have today, I think that tomorrow's conservatives may believe in a few policy points that the party does not currently believe in or stand behind today. And I will be very, very curious to see how that all unfolds and unravels, because these are social issues, right? I didn't really mention any economic issues right there, which tends to be where that big dividing line divides. You had mentioned taxes earlier, right? That tends to be a very dividing line between partisans. But it will be interesting to see if my generation clings on to these social issues and continues universally supporting them, or if it is something that will also fade as time goes on and as we get older.
In your travels, in your studies, in your campaign work, and perhaps just when you want to sit down and have a cup of coffee in between classes on campus, it is, needless to say, I should think it would be all too often that you do run into your counterparts on the other side of the political spectrum. And I should hope very much that those interactions are cordial, pleasant, if not fun and happy times. But what are those discussions like, without trying to out anybody or get too nosy into your own personal conversations? But I'll leave that dividing line to you. But what are those discussions like? I mean, is it just, oh man, that exam sucked, or oh my god, I have a huge paper to write, just like anybody else would discuss on college campuses? Or is it always, does it always seem to break down to, how can you support this? How can you stand for this? How can you not see my point of view?
Well, the thing, Jeff, is so I'll start this off by saying that one of my best friends is actually the president of my campus's college Republicans. I'll start off by actually saying that. So, and cordial sometimes is the right word to use, but we do go at it. We do go at it quite a bit, actually. Where I would say I draw the line, and I think that this differentiation isn't made enough, is what is politics and what is not politics. For me, politics is infrastructure. It is something, like how much should the rich get taxed, right? To me, that's politics. What is not politics to me are matters of human rights, matters of protecting our republic, our democracy. And so I am unwilling to waver whatsoever or really humor conversation that would go against those issues, which I do not believe are issues of standard politics, right? We talk about infrastructure, talk about, for example, even the student loan crisis, how to handle that. We could have differences when it comes to, financial politics, for example, as far as it goes with human rights or protecting our United States of America. I draw the line there. That is no longer politics. So I am absolutely willing to have those tough conversations about policy, and I love to have them. Some of my best friends disagree with me very staunchly on matters of policy, but there are policy questions and there are human rights questions, and I think we need to do a better job of drawing the line between those because it should be drawn.
I do think that it is. I'm openly admitting that I may be subject to a very gross oversimplification of this, and a mass generalization. I try to be better and smarter than that, but I realize that I might be subject to one right now. And I'll admit that. I'll preface that with that admission. But it seems to me that there are very few actual Republicans left in this country. That the older ones simply wear the name. The party is non-functional. It has largely become fascist in its operations. It is about power and holding offices, but doing nothing with them, other than continuing to deliver more and more money to the top 1%. Yours and my money, by the way. Not even money that they're making of their own and just keeping it because we cut taxes. But there are very, very few actual real Republicans and lots of self-identified ones. Is there any way that when you're having these conversations, is there the little voice in the back of your head going, how did you even get to this conclusion? There's nothing in modern Republican politics that benefits your generation. Literally nothing. Environmental policy, tax policy, or certainly the existence of the democracy itself. Republicans love to split hairs. It's a republic, not a democracy. The factual definitions of those two words are minuscule in their differences. Great Britain's a republic as well. It has elected representation. Okay, so is Western Europe. That said, they refer to themselves as democracies, the Western democracies. So how I am absolutely fascinated and literally almost have no explanation other than Fox News and handing down the parental mantle, if you will, of why anyone in your generation, anyone, would self-identify with Republicans and Republicanism. Do you have any reason why that would happen?
I would say a big part of it probably is, carrying down that family mantle, because as I mentioned a few questions ago, there are these universal policy points that my generation seems to agree on regardless of partisan affiliation. And like I said, many of those seem to go against some of the fundamental policy points of the modern day GOP. From my experience, the conversations that I have had with, I won't say all, but many young Republicans who self-identify as such, has given me hope that the future of the party will look very different. If we can sit face to face and agree on these human rights issues, we can agree on, the need to protect our democracy, the need to not vote for example, Donald Trump in the next election, who many people do believe would pose a threat to our democracy. The fact that I could sit down and have those conversations with people who are ideologically different than me, and they'll say, hey, I'm still a Republican. And it's very comforting to hear that, because it makes me think that the future of that party is going to look different, and it might be headed in the right direction with time. I am a proud Democrat myself, and there are many issues that I staunchly disagree with young conservatives on. But the fact that we're starting to come together with issues that, like I said, I do not see as political, issues of human rights, issues of protecting our democracy, our republic, that is giving me hope that the future of our country is one that is going in the right direction instead of the wrong one. And it's so easy, I think, to look at the United States of America right now and think about the disarray that our country is in, because we are in disarray right now. We are in turmoil, and we are reaching a critical point where, just like on the battlefields of Gettysburg, just like in Selma, just like in the halls of Seneca Falls, we're going to need to defend this republic again. And this time it will be at the ballot box. And if we can come together and agree on these fundamental, truths of a democracy, then I'm very comfortable with the direction that our country will one day be going in. And this is not short term. This is long term, 10 years down the road, right? 6 years from now, my generation is going to represent over 60% of the entire eligible electorate of the United States of America. That is massive, right? We already make up 37% of the electorate. This is the largest generation ever. So for it to be overtaking that large of a percent of our voting body in such a short amount of time, if what I'm saying to you, Jeff, does come to fruition, and we can come together as a country instead of continuing to drive these stakes into our republic, I do have hope. I have hope 6 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, that things could get better. But we need to ensure that we get to that point, which means protecting things in the short term as well.
7:02 Eastern Time, entering the second hour of the Kennedy Effect, live with you for the 24th of September, 2023. Wherever you might be across the Facebook universe, thank you for being there. We have shared the show to well over 100 places so far. More to come when Facebook temporarily takes my little ban off. They don't like when I share to too many places and not pay them money for it. And that's basically it's really not anything more difficult than that. They want their literal 2 cents, if you will. So we'll be sharing to yet more places in about another 10 or 15 minutes or so. That said, wherever you may be watching across the Facebook universe, thank you very, very much. Whether it is your own personal timeline, your private group, your public group, national pages, global pages. I suppose since it's on the internet, everything's global. But thank you for allowing us to be there. We could not do it without you. If you were not there, we would not be here. If you would like to come over to my own timeline, Jeff Kennedy, or that other side of information, you can comment, ask your questions there, especially questions. I want to know what you're thinking. Tell us what you're thinking. Ask us questions. I will ask them all if they're coherent. Every now and then I get one that's not too terribly coherent. And we try to make it coherent. We will ask it, and we will make it part of the discussion here. Come on over to my Facebook, Jeff Kennedy, that other side of information, and follow us there. And remember that the group doesn't shut down when the show's off. We're always there posting interesting news stories, topics that we are interested in, topics that we think you will be interested in. And again, they're not all political. I do a pretty darn good amount of animal advocacy articles, that other side of information, the occasional sports story. Equal pay in sports usually is what it tends to come down to be. We posted a story yesterday about a professional Russian hockey player in the NHL who actually spoke out against the war and now doesn't know if he's ever going to be able to go home again. We post a lot of articles about astronomy. I fancy myself a very, very avid astronomical viewer and very much of a novice, to be honest with you, but we do put stuff like that up there, science articles, environmental articles. We mentioned the animal advocacy. So come on over, check out our group, become a member of our group, and every time we post something, you'll know about it. That other side of information on Facebook. Hot101.net, one of the originators of global internet radio. We thank you all around the globe. Some 250,000 people that we reach every single week around this small blue planet of ours. And again, if you pay attention to the heavens the way I do, as far as watching the movement of the planets and the stars, you realize just how small we can be, and that it isn't really just a catchphrase, it's the truth. There is no planet B. We either fix this one or we don't. There's really only two choices. Hot101.net, our name is our web address. If you can connect to the internet, you can listen to Hot101.net. Desktop computers, laptops, where did I lose my place? Because somebody sent me a message and I started reading it. Holy small attention span, Jeff. Wowee. So yeah, laptops, desktops, tablets, phones, Bluetooth it to your headsets, Bluetooth it to earbuds, Bluetooth it in the car, actually, or to anywhere. If you can connect, you can listen to hot101.net. That's the simple truth here. Our name is our web address, but you can also use our apps, Apple App Store, Google Play Store for Android, and the Tune In Radio app. Go up to the search bar, type in hot101.net, and you will find us. And by the way, those apps are extremely simple to use. You tap them, they open, you're listening, that's it. Nothing to register for, no information to put in. We don't need blood samples and create a profile and all that fun stuff. You tap on it, it opens, you're listening, done. Hot101.net 24/7 and around the globe. We're also part of the TCP Media Group from right here in Lancaster, PA. A couple of show announcements. The Villain's View will not be with you tonight at 9 o'clock. You are off for the rest of the night after we finish with you. And then some more bad news. We will not be with you next week. I will be traveling. I will be seeing this young lady in person, which is not good for her, but it's good for me. I'm happy to see her in person. There's the weird old guy again. And I will see her next week in the lovely casino at Valley Forge for a meeting. Let me say that too. If you listen, if you watch, if you know me, if you don't know me, if you want to know me, if you want to throw rotten tomatoes at me or come give me a hug, I will be at the Pennsylvania State Democratic Party's committee meeting next weekend, Friday night and Saturday, probably till around mid-afternoon. If you see me, say hi to me. Tell me who you are. Say hi. I might see your name on the screen every week. Or maybe you listen and you don't comment and you listen in the background. But if you know anything about our program, come say hi to me. I will be in Valley Forge this weekend, or either that, where all the folks, George is sitting on the other side. I know what George is thinking right now. He's sitting on the other side going, or all the people that want to kill you now know where to find you next week. And that's true. I suppose that's true. So there's that. Of course, our sponsor, the PayGive app, paygive.org, www.paygive.org. The Cash App financial transaction app. You can buy gift cards through the app. You have to pay for things. We all have to buy things to keep things going. The 99% of us that use 100% of our income just to be alive, we have to buy things. When you do, you can use the PayGive app, and a portion of your financial transaction, a percentage of it, can go to a cause or charity or possibly even a political candidate of your choice. There are animal welfare charities. There are veterans charities. There are children's charities. You can pick any one of, I believe the number of vendors that is involved with the app is almost 50,000. And the number of charities is well over 5,000. I'm sure there's someone in there, including large ones like the ASPCA, the American Red Cross. I think Vote Vets is in there. There's a ton. You have to buy things and you have to pay for them. Why not make a difference while you do it? Paygive.org. You have to pay for things. Why not give while you do it? Our guest is Kait Ahern, who is way smarter and way younger than me, and way better at this. I very well may have to just stop showing up to my own show, and I will leave it to her now from now on for weeks. She's way more eloquent than I. As I stumble, as the sign falls, I knock the sound cord out. I don't swear much on this program, but it is a bloody shit show over here. Let's just be blunt, okay? Let's just be honest, shall we? It's an effing shit show over here, and I need to clean this studio. There are loose wires. I don't know what's happening. There's a ghost in here, or my dad got sick of me talking about him, or getting misty when I talk about him, which he probably wouldn't be happy about either, and shook my sound wires. I don't know what's happening, but it's happening. We're just going to try to keep it going until either the power shuts down or whatever. I also got a text, which is interesting, from Kristen downstairs that said, "Sorry for the ruckus down here. It's been eventful. Everyone needs to eat," which means the dogs are barking. We're dog sitting. We now have 2 dogs shoved in this tiny place. And so they're eating and barking at each other because they have to eat separately because they have their own food. But boy, there's nothing tastier on the planet than somebody else's food. So we have to get to that. Then everybody needed to go outside, and the cat flipped his bed over into the window. So it's been a night over here, folks, and it's not even like a bad thunderstorm. We haven't lost power yet, but then again, I just said that out loud. So anything could happen. Our phone line is open. It's the old-fashioned way because it's not working through the computer the way it should. George and I have still not been able to solve that out, but you can call us if you wish, 267-227-9189. 267-227-9189. We take you as long as we can take you, either before everything crashes or Kate says, "Enough, I'm sick of talking to you, you crazy old fool. Get out of here. I will see you next week anyway." No Villains View at 9. We will stay with you as long as we can, or at least up until 9 o'clock. We will be away from you next week. We will return in October. Kate, before I ask you a bit of a historical question about your colleagues, shall we say, on the other side of the aisle, you mentioned quite heartedly that there are a baseline couple of policy positions that you and your conservative friends do agree on. Is one of those the fact that even the United Nations now classifies the United States as a declining democracy?
So let me give that one a little bit of thought. I mean, there are aspects of what that would mean that I think folks across the board my age would agree with. One thing that a lot of people are concerned about, just generally, is the perhaps impending housing crisis that's going to happen when my generation has, I think on average, I believe $40,000 in student loans to pay back. I believe it's on average, and that is before it collects any interest. So when you have an entire generation, over half of which is college educated and has these loans, right? And that is an average. There are people whose student loan debt is much higher than that and are going to be burdened with this. I've spoken with quite a few people who are concerned that they might not be able to purchase a house at the age that they would like to. A lot of people are struggling financially. Debt is a big issue just across the board for my generation. And I do think the fact that their parents were able to be in a comfortable financial position, and some of my friends feel as though they are not in that same position right now. I think that does impact maybe their view on the state of the United States of America. I would just say that young people in general, I think, are wary of institutions as well. So young Republicans, for example, don't have all that much faith in the RNC. Young Democrats, for example, don't have all that much faith in the DNC. And these are their political parties. So I think that also may say something about the state of not democracy, but the state of America right now. Congressional approval is at an all-time low, especially with young people. Approval of the Supreme Court is at an all-time low, including with young people.
To be honest, as it should be. Let's just be as it should be.
Yeah, I will just say, for any other armchair historians in the audience, it's at a historic all-time low in modern times. There has actually been a few instances where Supreme Court trust in it and by the public has actually fallen below what it is today. For anyone listening that may have wanted to correct me on that. But yeah, Jeff, I think there are a few things about young people trusting institutions, young people being concerned that they won't be able to provide for themselves the way that their parents' generation was, that is kind of weakening a faith in the people who are currently leading our government. I'm not sure, to be completely blunt about it, right? I do think Republicans tend to self-identify as being, patriotic, being very vocally enthusiastic about the United States government. So I'm not quite sure if they would say that we are a failing democracy. I do think there are some universal issues, like, for example, the fact that our Congress is not exactly functioning and our Supreme Court is extremely corrupt. And I do think a lot of young people, regardless of partisan affiliation, can recognize that, and it might weigh into them secretly thinking that, or partly thinking.
Where do you think that distrust comes from? Do you think it is an innate and studied mistrust? Or again, is it something passed down? Never trust a politician, never trust a lawyer, never the government is the Reagan's famous 9-word lie. One of the biggest lies ever told to anyone in the history of this country. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. It seems to me that the right, and I can't speak for your generation, so I'm asking as much as I am trying to put a fact out and tell our audience a story, that this distrust of government is something that has been grown, that it is not natural, that it is actually something that has been fomented. I think it was Maggie earlier on in the program mentioned that we don't teach civics. One of Mr. Reagan's first appointments when he was installed he didn't steal an election. We've only done that after that. When he was sworn in, January 20th, 1981, one of his very first appointments was Bill Bennett, as Secretary of Education. Bill Bennett's first action was to end the mandatory teaching of civics, because it is very difficult to complain about a government when you don't understand how it works. And it's also then to take that to come from both sides and kind of end up at the same point, it becomes that much easier to tell people how bad your government is when they don't know how it works, and how much it's not there to help you, and how much against it that there is. I always find it very fascinating that conservatives, self-identified Republicans and conservatives, can't seem to marry the fact in their own brain that their party wants to deconstruct government, tear it apart, break it down, but yet they really desperately want to control it. Why would you want to control an institution that you think shouldn't exist?
So I don't think, obviously I can't speak. I truthfully cannot speak on behalf of these young conservatives, right? I am not myself one, but I can comfortably say, not comfortably, I can comfortably assume what a few answers of these questions may be based on conversations I've had, colleagues I am friends with and have had these conversations about. And I think, to answer your first question about, is this something that's passed down? Why is it that young people just at large are so wary of institutions, regardless of partisan affiliation? Our generation was born and brought up in a very tumultuous time. Born into the aftermath of 9/11, into the war on terror, We were about 8 years old or younger when the 2008 financial crash happened. So many of us did, in the middle class and working class, many of us did not have, the luxury of financial comfort growing up. One or both of our parents or guardians may have been without a job. And I do think that factors in pretty heavily in this mindset of maybe we shouldn't trust the government. Maybe we shouldn't trust our institutions all that much. There has not exactly been a time of ease, of, generational comfort that my generation has yet seen. We were in high school in our first years of college when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, and seeing the government's response to that angered people on both sides of the aisle. And this is not unique to my generation. But I will say, my generation, I've spoken with many people who feel personally injured by the government's response to this. They lost half of their college experience, they lost half of their high school experience. And it happened, all of these events happened at formative times of young people's lives, right? Again, born in the aftermath of 9/11, brought up in the war on terror, brought up in the 2008 financial crisis, had a few years of ease, and then the whole world turned upside down with the COVID-19 pandemic. And the government's response to that, I'll repeat it again, I think very much upset people on both sides of the aisle, albeit for very different reasons. But it has led, in my opinion, to this distrust of institutions. And it's not to say that my generation hates these institutions. It's just that I think many of us are wary about whether or not they can actually affect the type of change that we would like to see. At the same time, my generation is not giving up on these institutions, which is wonderful to see, right? There has never been a generation in American history since the right to vote was extended to 18-year-olds that has voted at rates as high as Gen Z has, right? There has never been a generation that has protested in numbers as large as this generation has. There has never been a generation, for example, that has actually been as civically engaged. And we can unpack that one and chalk most of it up to social media, because a lot of that civic engagement, I will confess, a lot of it is, belonging to, say, a social media group on Facebook, and you can talk with like-minded peers, you can talk with your friends. It's situations like that, but many people would also perhaps consider, going on Instagram and following a political pundit there and consider that to be civic engagement. So say what you will about my generation being civically engaged, but I do think that we're not giving up on these institutions. We're just wary of them, and we would like things to change, and we would like them to be fixed. And I do think it's a product of our upbringing. It's not so much something that has been passed down. It's a lived experience.
You mentioned your study of and appreciation of history.
Mm-hmm.
History is one of the big five things that we talk about here on this program and try to make a habit of talking about on this program each and every week. Facts, science, data, and history. Did I say five? I'm forgetting something then. I forget what the hell else I'm forgetting at that point. But facts, science, data, and history. And because while history can continue to be studied and arguably even interpreted, there's no changing it. It happened. One of the things that fascinates me, and I don't say fascinating in like a, looking at something at the zoo sort of fascination, but genuinely does fascinate me about your generation is exactly what you talked about. I don't think enough people of other generations have a decent appreciation for everything that your generation has seen. If you are, let's just think about it. If you were born on New Year's Day 2000, you've seen the greatest attack on the United States inside our borders since Pearl Harbor, a near meltdown of the world financial system, which, by the way, began in 2007. We seem to consistently forget that the seeds of that were beginning to germinate in 2007. We tend to think of it as 2008. It seems to all get laid at the feet of President Obama, but it started before that, by the way, folks. You've seen this fake war on terror, which really seems to have done nothing but make Halliburton one of the largest global corporations on earth, and has drained the United States Treasury of, no pun intended, conservative estimates are in the $3 trillion range. Senator Sanders tells us it's double digits of trillions of dollars. You've seen a global pandemic, and you've seen an insurrection. You've seen a literal armed, violent attempt to end the federal government as we know it. And oh, by the way, the leading candidate for what was one of the leading political parties in this country, because again, I will maintain maybe not to my dying day, because hopefully it'll come back. Democracy demands two functional parties, but is no longer a functioning party. The leading candidate on the Republican side, who said the Constitution should be suspended. You have seen a lot, but you've also grown up in a United States where you yourself, and even if you want to go back to folks who were born again on January 20th, 1981, you've never known a nation that has not operated under this trickle-down Reaganism type of economics, where if we just give the rich people more and more and more and more money, everything will be great for the rest of us. Some $55 trillion of wealth has been transferred to the top 1%. They've been saved it just in income tax cuts since Reaganism, since the imposition of trickle-down economics on this country. Mr. Reagan, long before you were born, stated that one of his reasons for running for president was to destroy what was left of the New Deal. And I can say those two words to you and you'll know what I'm talking about, but I still think there's a percentage of your generation that doesn't know what the hell the New Deal was. And they sure as hell didn't grow up in it. So knowing or not knowing this history, your generation has yet still excelled in its civic engagement. So why do you think that is? What if there isn't one particular thing, and I think to try to nail it down to one particular thing would be a gross oversimplification, but where your generation has either looked at each other, like I said, at the student center over a cup of coffee and said, this isn't right. Something's just not right here. And yet you've decided to do something about it. Your generation has realized that 3 people in the United States have as much wealth as the bottom 160 million. That just 8 people on the planet have as much wealth as the bottom 4 billion people. It isn't right that millions of people across the country have been purged from the voter rolls simply because a party in power doesn't like the way they vote. And you know that this isn't right. But then again, this has been the United States since Reaganism. So having only grown up under this system, but yet somehow coming to the conclusion something's not right here. Is there any way for you to tell us how your generation has made that leap? Even your conservative colleagues who say, wait, that black man does not deserve to be treated this way. He's an American the same as I. So you've made that leap somehow, but never knowing, not growing up under the New Deal in any way, shape, or form, you've still made that conclusion. Is there any way to describe how you've made that conclusion or come to that conclusion?
There are some...
The question may even make sense in the first place, because it's bloody long-winded. But if any of the question makes sense in the first place, it would seem to me that if I I don't even know what a good example is. It's hard to describe the horrors of World War II when I didn't grow up in that generation. I can read about it, I can watch the film, I can study it, but it's not. I didn't grow up in it. How have you all come to identify a country that doesn't exist anymore? It did. It did. The New Deal worked, but you never experienced it. But somehow you've made that leap of heart and mind, I would say. You've made that leap to say that worked, even though I don't never experienced it.
There are some who would say that America does not have its own distinct culture. And for me, when I think of America, one word comes to mind that really captures the culture of America, and it's perseverance, right? When times get tough, we get tougher, and we never know how to quit. And I would expect nothing less of a country, that is made up of the children of immigrants and the children of people who were, forcibly brought over here and fought tooth and nail for their own freedom. We are absolutely a country that knows how to fight back. And we will demand what we think is necessary and what we believe we deserve and what are our unalienable rights. And I see my generation doing that. I look at people in my generation and I do see the people in their families that came before them that fought for these rights originally. And I see the spirit of all of those great Americans before them, standing behind them. And that to me is the spirit of America itself. It's perseverance. We wouldn't know how to quit if it was the last option possible given to us. And I do see my generation capturing that spirit. We aren't giving up on America. We aren't giving up on these institutions. We're going out and voting. We're getting civically engaged. And we're doing it, and we're fighting back and pushing back against the things about our country that we believe aren't working, that are not functional anymore. And in no way, shape, or form are we going to lay down and just take it, because that is not what Americans do. And that's my answer to you. I think that we persevere.
It would seem to me that your generation, perhaps more than any other before it, has, except perhaps maybe the generations literally after the formation of the country, when so much of our founding documents were yet to be exercised, tested, adjudicated, and so on and so on, that it is your generation that has come to the realization that true patriotism is to actually complain about what doesn't work and try to make it better. That true patriotism is not just drone-like following this particular person or this particular philosophy, but that when you genuinely love something, you are willing to talk about what parts of it are at fault or what parts of it don't work well and fight to make them better. That's what the opposite. I've said too many times in this program. George can put another nickel in the jar. That the opposite of love is not hate, it is apathy.
Yeah.
And that you don't hate the country, you love it so much that you want it to work and be better. And it would seem to me that your generation has probably come to that realization themselves, personally and collectively, arguably more than any other.
I say that quite often, that it is not at all remotely because I hate America that I criticize it. I love my country more than anything else in the world. And it is for that very reason that I will openly criticize it, because I know that it is better than what it is showing today. I believe in democracy. I believe in America. And for those reasons, I'm not going to give up on this country. It's something worth fighting for. And that means that it is our responsibility to speak up and speak out when we think that something isn't being done fairly, right? Founding fathers put that in the First Amendment, that we have the right to redress our own government. It was so important to them, so critical to a democracy, that it was the very first thing that they decided to write down as being one of our rights. right? We have the right to redress our government and freedom of speech. And real patriotism is willingness to criticize the government. I think people in modern times will sometimes confuse nationalism with patriotism. They are two very different things, right? Someone who is nationalistic, they might believe that their country as is could do no wrong and is the best in the world, and the people, or an idea of the people who live in that country, are better than everyone else in the world. And if you do not fit into that narrow idea, you do not belong in that country, right? And so I believe that true patriotism is not what many people believe it to be in America today. We have a lot of people who are nationalists who co-opt the word patriot. And if you are a history buff like me, and you are at all familiar with the founding of our nation, right, you would know what a true patriot is. It is someone who absolutely would be willing to redress the government and speak up loudly and proudly, not because they hate America, but because they love it and they know it can be better than what it's showing off today.
Well, let's talk about that then. What are the right seems to have co-opted a good number of things that they have taken to be theirs, and that there's no room for anyone else in this tent. They are the only patriots. They are the only ones who are patriotic. They are the constitutionalists, except their leader who wants to suspend it. But yet somehow that's constitutional. I can't put that together. They are the only ones who are religious. God is on their side. How do you feel about those things? Perhaps you're a religious person, perhaps you're not. I am a person of faith, deep, oddly enough, getting deeper the older I get. They don't own my God, and they don't own my faith. They don't own patriotism. They don't own this country. We've established pretty much only 3 people own the country, but they don't own it. What are those? And these are things that you mentioned earlier on the program are not necessarily political issues to you. And I can understand that point of view. But they have become political. When Republicans have no platform, and they don't, and I say that as a matter of fact because I believe it is a matter of fact. They have one thing on the agenda. The rest of it is distraction. And that is to make the rich richer. It's why we consistently on this program refer to them as the Republican corporation. The elected office holders are simply the employees. The owners, the stockholders, are the donors who own those elected officials. Their sole purpose seems to be to do whatever is necessary to the point of ending our government as we know it, ending the American experiment, just so those rich people can continue to get richer and richer and richer and richer. The top 1% in the country has made a conscious decision, it seems to me, that democracy is no longer necessary or even convenient for their existence. And their endless pursuit of more and more and more and more wealth. If and or when you have these discussions with like-minded folks or your colleagues on the right, that, oh, you godless Democrats. Well, no, guess what? No. And I don't mean necessarily that you go to, the full 4-hour Catholic Mass every Sunday, but you know what I mean? No. I have faith. I'm a person of faith. You don't own that. I love my country, which is why I want it to be better. You don't own that. What are those when you move it outside of I guess it's something a little bit more ethereal, not just tax policy or foreign policy or defense spending or something like that, but these more sort of, I should say, and the opposite, these less tangible sort of
Mhm.
topics. How do you have those discussions?
So I do think there is a very loud group of people that certainly believes the things that you just said, right? And it is very deeply unsettling to hear that there is such a large number of Americans that think that half the country is a certain way just because they disagree with them politically, right? That does not signal anything good about the state or health of our democracy. Um, I think that, and then I'll speak as a campaign staffer, right? So something that I know from working on campaigns is there is something called deep canvassing. And it's when a campaign staffer, somebody who works on a campaign, actually goes and has a lengthy face to face conversation with the voter. And this is by and large the most successful way to actually reach voters who disagree with you politically. And I'm not talking tax policy, Jeff. There was one famous study that was conducted where transgender canvassers actually went into a neighborhood that was filled with Republican voters, I believe in Florida, and having these face to face conversations, and people could see that they're human. They could be your neighbor. They could be, somebody that you could personally see yourself speaking to. You would be shocked to hear some of the changed opinions that the people in this study actually came out with and said afterwards. Now, some people are just hateful, spiteful people that really just are going to be discriminatory towards people. They're not going to want to hear you out. They have, they might be racist or sexist, or, they might follow one religion and hate yours because you don't follow theirs. There are many, many people like that in the United States. But I do believe there are many others who have been brainwashed, right? And that they aren't necessarily hateful, horrid people who are incapable of seeing their neighbors as humans. I think there are many people who just need to have a conversation and plug themselves out of hearing this brainwashing, right? There are politicians in America who would like to convince you that you should hate your neighbor, who would like to convince you that they are the enemy. You're somebody that you go to the grocery store next to, somebody that you sit next to in your church pew, that they are the enemy. They're a bad person fundamentally because they disagree with you. And I would say, it's having these tricky conversations and convincing them, I should say, reminding them that we're all people. We're all just people, right? And reminding them of that does make a huge difference. We've seen that with campaign research, like I just said. And I believe that we can do that in our everyday lives. And I do think for a substantial number of people, it's not necessarily their truly held belief, this hatred that they have inside of them. I think it's something that they can be talked into letting go of. I think it is something that they hear over and over and over again. And it happens on both sides, that it's just this idea that the enemy is not human. They're inconsolable. You could never possibly, have a conversation with them. And I think that reminding them that maybe the politicians that they're hearing, for example, on Fox News, are not necessarily true, and that they should be viewing their everyday neighbors, right, as just what they are, somebody in their community, just like them, just a little bit different.
Well, let me push back on that, because one of the things that I do get a lot of pushback on this program, and I think our own program to an extent is guilty of that.
Mhm.
I don't think it's by design. I think it's just sort of worked out that way. We don't have but the one advertiser, and even that is very recent. Everything that we do to publicize the program is free. We don't make money here. All of that So I think it is very natural that an overwhelming percentage of the people that listen are of like mind. They're pretty much going to agree with me almost no matter what I say, as long as it somehow makes sense. And if they don't agree, they probably agree to some percentage, but maybe not completely. But one of the things that I really have gotten a lot of pushback about from guests and audience alike is this idea. I consider it more fact, to be honest, more sociological fact than anything else. But then again, it's my opinion, so obviously I tend to think I'm right, usually, even when I'm not. That said, this 30 to 35% of the country that seems to be willing to follow Mr. Trump no matter what he says or does.
Mm-hmm.
They are willing to take up arms and quite literally kill on his behalf. This percentage of the population that feels we should all be in concentration camps simply because we're Democrats. The folks who have contacted me through social media and on this program who think I simply should be shot.
Mm-hmm.
Just shot for what I think. And since all the rest of the family's dead, why don't I just join them? This lot can't be spoken to because they don't want to hear it. They don't want to listen. They think they're right. They're not just on the right, they think they are right. And it would seem to me, to borrow a biblical story, that they need to wander the desert for 40 years and die out before we have a chance. Is that hyperbolic? Is it over dramatic? Or is your generation finding that you're having more luck when you walk up to the front doors of those and they have the big F Biden, don't blame me, I voted for Trump flags and all that even with that, you can still have a conversation? Because I certainly haven't been able to.
So I'll start off by saying I think the internet has exacerbated a lot of things. So I know I've been talking actually a surprising amount about bipartisanship and non-partisan things tonight, which is surprising for anyone that does know me because I'm usually quite partisan, right? I would consider myself to be an advocate of bipartisanship, but I am very much a Democrat. And I make those.
You be both. You can be both.
It is both. It
Democracy,
is both.
Small d democracy.
Yes.
Demands two functioning political parties.
Absolutely.
We don't have that.
Yes.
We do not have that. Yeah. I believe it is partially why the United Nations considers the United States a declining democracy, because one party is interested in policy and issues and solutions and governing and the functionality of government, and the other one wants power. I have told this story on this program a lot, folks. If you're a regular, then you've heard it. Grab a couple of cookies for the next minute or two. I may have even told you this story. The Canadian government is in the midst of running an ongoing set of simulations and protocols throughout its entire national government, through all the ministries, what we would refer to here in the States as departments. They are ministries in a parliamentary system: the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of State, and so on. Contemplating how Canada will react, what its policies will be, and how it will function, not if, but when American democracy ends. So we have the United Nations declaring us a democracy in danger and a declining democracy. We have our neighbors to the north. I don't know why I pointed up. Up is not north. Saying, what are we going to do when they cease to be a democracy? These are not... Democracy demands two functioning parties. We don't have it now. So, which is not for me to sit on this side and say all is doomed, doom and gloom, no optimism. But we got to be honest about this section of this country who wants us dead. Not just we don't disagree with you, or not we don't think you should win this election. You should be dead simply because Jeff Kennedy - Democrat, Northampton County.
I would say so. Well, I mean, the reason that I brought up many people watching, I'm assuming probably almost all of the people watching do not know me personally. And I certainly have been towing more so, or putting on more so, my little bipartisan hat tonight and talking about, my hope for the future of the country. But the reason I even mentioned that is, for those who do know me, you would probably know me more in my partisan realm. I'm here tonight speaking on behalf of the Pennsylvania College Democrats, of which I am the president currently. I'm a Democratic campaign staffer. I do post quite a bit on social media about Democratic politics. So I've also gotten my fair share of the most abhorrent, awful things that people have, complete strangers, have said to me, including getting doxxed on the internet with, my home address and personal information, people saying they were going to kill me, awful, awful things. And so, yes, Jeff, I completely understand. There is a subsection of this country, and I would hope and pray that it is a very, very loud minority to an extreme, I hope, that would like to hurt people, right? Who have that, Jeff Kennedy, D, Northampton County, next to your name. Kait Ahern, D, Lackawanna, right? There are people that would hope to do that. And I've had a lot of these real conversations with folks across the aisle, and this may just be my own lived experience. It may not be accurate, but I do think they are an extremely vocal minority. I've met a lot of people that really look down on the folks that do that, who would politically agree with them. Not with everything, because there is a very specific type of person, right, who's willing to make those threats. A very specific, very aggressive and violent type of person. I would also say I think that the internet has worsened this giant partisan divide that we have right now. I think it has worsened it a lot, because instead of you saying this to a person that you personally know, which no reasonable person would ever consider, ever resorting to these violent words and these threats to a person that you know personally, suddenly you're behind a screen and it's somebody that you don't know, and you are able to very easily pick on that person. And it doesn't carry the same weight as it would as if you're saying it to a person face to face. Now, Jeff, I will say I would probably be in the camp of people that would say that there is the people who are still willing to vote for Donald Trump, who has, in my opinion, as a scholar of United States government, I believe he is an active threat to our government. I believe that now I should also mention, scholar may be a heavily weighted word. I have my degree in it. Maybe I'm an armchair expert in United States government, but I'm an enthusiast of our democracy, and he is a threat to it, regardless of whatever party you belong to. I say this all the time. Our United States Capitol has only been breached twice, once by a foreign enemy, a foreign military in the War of 1812.
A superior foreign military.
Yes.
Yeah, at that, a superior foreign military, which is also not unpatriotic to say. Read history.
It's true.
I mean, it just...
Yeah, it's mind-boggling, because our Capitol has only been breached twice in our nation's history.
But isn't this why the study of history is so important?
Absolutely.
Not just from an economic standpoint, although I continue to believe that if your generation and subsequent generations that end up being the youngest generation
Mm-hmm.
really, really gladly knew, where did that word come from? Truly knew the depth of the effectiveness of the New Deal, would say to themselves, hey, that sounds pretty good. That there was a time, decades long, that this country was the leading industrial power on the planet. That within just 8 years of Reagan, we went from the largest importer of raw materials and exporter of finished goods on the planet to having that completely reversed. We became the largest importer of finished goods and the largest exporter of raw materials. One of the largest American exports right now. I know this really turns some folks' stomach, but I actually think it speaks to the bordering on the quote unquote second world that we're declining toward. Even though we are barely still the largest economy on earth, just no pun intended when I say what I'm going to say, hairs above China. That one of our largest exports is human hair. Okay? I mean, it's a sobering thing. We were the largest lending nation on earth before Reagan. We lent more money and directly gave more foreign aid to every country on the planet, or more than any other country on the planet. We became the largest debtor nation in just 8 years. This country was ripped from your generation, was ripped from my generation. But yet, doesn't history show us that worked?
Mm-hmm.
And we could do that again.
I do think so. This is an unfortunate thing about my generation, and I'm not sure if I'm qualified to speak on behalf of my generation regarding this, but so I'll start off with saying what I personally believe regarding this. So I am very proud to be the grandchild of factory workers, and I come from a very long line of people who were, blue collar workers, a lot of coal miners, a lot of American manufacturing outside of, coal mining as well. And
Union
so
members, I would assume.
Hmm?
Union members, I would assume.
Oh, absolutely union members. Absolutely. And enthusiastically, yes. So it's very important to my family in particular that we do always shop small and buy American. And we first and foremost always go to small local community businesses to support, American industry and kind of bolster our own local economy. That is not something I see many folks in my generation doing. And I will say that bluntly. And it is an unfortunate truth, I think, because that's one of the issues that's most important to me. I just don't see it as an issue that's talked about frequently by folks in my generation on either side of the aisle.
Something that Republicans used to talk about.
Yes.
Buy American.
Yeah.
They don't talk about that much anymore because the people who own them don't care where you buy it. They're making money either way.
And I do think another part of it too is for my generation in particular, consumerism has gotten obscene, right? My generation loves fast fashion, for example, which will segue a bit into environmentalism. The fashion industry, for those who do not know, is the second worst polluting industry in the world, second only to the fossil fuel industry. Fashion is awful for the environment, and my generation loves to buy in bulk from websites like Amazon or Shein or Forever 21. And these are fast fashion. These are companies that are based out of China or Malaysia, and the individuals who are unfortunately working in these factories are more or less engaging in slave labor. They're getting paid no money, and they're living in factory towns, and they have no time off. And it's an awful practice. But my generation engages in it and keeps that cycle going quite a bit, right? We have a very unhealthy relationship with consumerism. There is no shopping slow. There is no shopping conscious. It is buy, consume, consume, consume. I don't care that it's slave labor. I don't care that it's ruining the environment. And these are things that people, now that sounds a bit extreme to say, right? Nobody's actually saying that, but it is, you have to imagine it is a thought that might cross through some people's heads. There is an awareness that this is the practice. And it's still something that people engage in despite knowing that. Yes, it hurts the American economy. Yes, it's hurting those people that are slaving away in those factories. It is killing our environment, quite literally. And people still don't care. So, Jeff, I would love for that to be an issue that my generation fixes. I can make no promise that it's something that we're actually going to address because it is always in the back burner. There are very few people my age that are interested in shopping slow, shopping conscious, and shopping American and supporting, our American unions. Very few of them.
But your generation polls will show that your generation is again awakening to look, there's always an American generation that's in your age group, right? I mean, so when I say your generation, it's, I hate to break the news to you, Gen Zers, you're not going to be 23 forever. We all get older. And wait till your metabolism slows down. And I know you've all heard that a lot, but just wait, man. So that you're not going to be, there's always your generation. There's always going to be a group that's in their 20s. And you do think it's pretty cool when an Amazon drone drops a box on your porch. Like that's it. Even though the thing that's in it is probably something that you just didn't need a drone to bring to you. But polls do show that your generation is, as with so many other things that you've never experienced, the private sector unionization rate in this country when Reagan came to power was about 37.5%. 37.4, I think it was actually. So over a third of the private sector workers in this country were unionized. That is now under 6%. But it is finally, after 40 years of Reaganism, back in a growth spurt, if you will. And I think one of the great things is that polls show that among the many things that your generation has awoken to, that, wow, rich people really should be paying taxes. No, I shouldn't have to go into debt 6 figures just to get an education. Wow, I shouldn't have to be wealthy just to see a doctor. And that among the things that you're awakening to, I hope it's through a study of history or just self-consciousness, I don't know, that your generation is waking up to unionization again. There was actually a dip where certain generations said, no, we don't need unions anymore. We don't need that. But not yours. So it is in a way an awakening, and it's your generation that's leading it. Or is that too much of a generalization? I don't know. I think it is a bit of a. It's why Tom Hartman will talk within the same breath sometimes of, I fear for our democracy, but I see a great awakening. Well, it would seem that there can't be both, but it does seem to be that there is a bit of both, isn't it? Why don't we carry that into our final hour? Last hour of the Kennedy Effect, you gluttons, it's all you get for this week. We will wrap up the program sometime this hour. Bad news, the Villain's View will not be with you live tonight. You can watch recorded versions of the Villain's View, That Other Side of Information, hot101.net on Facebook, YouTube. There are recorded versions of the Villain's View No Live program tonight. Next weekend, get a calendar up here, the October 1st, we will not be with you. I will be traveling that week, working at the Pennsylvania State Democratic Committee meeting, fulfilling my obligations there, obligations I love deeply, and making an appearance there. So I will be on the road. We will not be with you next week. We will return on October 8th. Wherever you might be on Facebook, it's the Kennedy Effect Live for the 24th of September, 2023, our final hour. That Other Side of Information is our home group Facebook page. We continue to ask you for your comments and questions. Hot101.net. Our name is our address. Apple App Store, Google Play Store, and the TuneIn Radio app. And of course, you can tell Alexa to play Hot101.net. And finally, the TCP Media Group and our sponsor, the Pay Give app. You have to buy things, and when you do, you pay for them. We all have to pay for things. Why not give? When you do it, the Pay Give app, www.paygive.org, and the Pay Give app. Let's talk some policy before I let you get back to your evening and finally say, wow, he never shuts up. Let's do policy. Let's do a little policy. We've talked a lot about the sociological and kind of, quote unquote, state of the nation, if you will. Let's talk a little policy. Why is it not a bad thing for student loans to be erased? I tend to not like the word, and I have to say, it's my esteemed county chair here, Matt Muncy, that really made me think of this, and I thank him for it every time this issue comes up. This is not student loan forgiveness. What on earth do you need to be forgiven for? Wanting an education? Wanting to do better than your parents before you? Which reminds me of something I need to say. You don't need to be forgiven for anything. You should be relieved of this debt because education is not a for-profit business, or at least it shouldn't be. Why is the alleviation of student debt for your generation a really, really good policy decision for this country?
So you've mentioned the New Deal a few times. I would think of this as a New Deal type program that could be rolled out. And I say that because it's meant to stimulate the economy. It is meant to preserve and save the economy. My generation, I had mentioned this earlier on the show, if anyone is still listening in. I believe the average student loan debt for someone in my generation prior to racking up any interest is $20,000 to $40,000, somewhere in that range, right? That is a lot. And when I say the average, that means that there are many folks who are above that. That is averaged out. That's when you're taking all the community college graduates who hardly have any loans, and you're also averaging it out with all of the people who have $300,000 in student loan debt. I would say it is a great way for America to make an investment in its economy. These loans are going to rack up interest. They may be $25,000 today, but they could easily turn into $100,000, 10 years from now. This is not an ideal situation for America's up and coming generation to be holding on to that much debt at such a young age, right? This is the age group that should be stimulating the economy. They should be buying houses and buying cars and putting things back into, local small businesses where we can get that again, investment into the future of the American economy. What we're going to have is a generation that is unable to spend its money because we're going to be paying back loans for the next 10, 15, 20, 25 years. Again, half of my generation is too young to even be in college yet. And if these private college institutions continue to increase their tuition the way that they already have, you're going to be getting schools that are $100,000 a year to attend, not for 4 years, not for 4 years plus graduate school, for a single year. Now, I went to college in Pennsylvania. I went to a private liberal arts school, and I was blessed enough to be eligible for Pell Grants and to get a merit scholarship. So I thankfully do not have that much in loans, but I will say the college costs about $85,000 a year for students who do not have a scholarship, which is, to me, ridiculous. There is no education, in my opinion, that is worth $85,000 a year. I will say that up front. They have no reason to be charging that much. And it's not just my school. This is every single private liberal arts school that you have. I do believe that these schools know what they're doing, and they should be responsible for lowering their costs. But until they do that, I do believe the government has a responsibility to alleviate some of that. And I know that Biden's original plan was to alleviate $10,000 for students who fell below a certain threshold for your household income. And if you were Pell Grant eligible, if you fell below even that threshold, you are eligible for $20,000 of loan, not reimbursements, but they would cancel effectively the loans that you already had. And to me, all that does is it's an investment to the economy 10 years from now. Because I will tell you right here, America
$20,000 to $40,000 is a car. It's a down payment on a house.
Yes.
And nothing stimulates a national economic activity. One of the things that the George W. Bush administration got absolutely correct, their implementation didn't do well, and that's what led to the crash in 07 anyway, but home ownership drives an economy. Mm-hmm. Every dollar that's put into a home, 7 reverberates throughout the economy. You buy furniture, you buy appliances, you may hire a landscaper, you need the outside of the house painted, you have drywall and carpenters and masons and house cleaners and all these things, all the local businesses that you may for decor, or even just your local grocery and pharmacy once you've established yourself in a home, that this reverberates through the economy. That $20,000 to $40,000, if that was alleviated, is $20,000 to $40,000, and as Kate said, just that's right off the top. That doesn't even include the interest. That could then be used for a new vehicle, down payment on a house, defray some of the costs of raising a child, which is obscenely expensive in this country, so on and so on and so on. This is why this is an investment.
And one other thing as well is that the cost of housing is going up in many places. To touch on very briefly a very different issue, right? I come from a very working class area. Let's put it this way. The wealthy people where I live are middle class. We don't have actually wealthy people the way you would think of them, right? And that is how I grew up. It's how many people in my neck of the woods grew up in Pennsylvania. And we're starting to see that houses are getting too expensive for anybody here to afford them. And I do genuinely believe that's also going to pose a problem. You have a generation that does not have the amount of wealth that they need to purchase one of these houses. For example, my parents bought my house for $30,000, I believe, in 2000, and a house up the street from me just sold for $500,000. That is an insane increase in money in the span of 20 some years, right? And I think this is happening all across America. I know it's happening where I live, it's happening in other parts of my state. And so not only will you have young people that just can't afford a house at the age where they would like to be buying one, right? It's not a comfortable investment for them to make. On top of that, they're going to be having $40,000 in debt before any interest collects on it. It's not necessarily an ideal situation for my generation to be put in right after graduating college. The fact that this situation could get so bad in a few decades is very bad, in my opinion. And I'm not an economist. I want to make that clear. Absolutely am not an economist. This is just my layman's opinion as a young person who has somewhat looked into these things.
Let's talk healthcare.
Okay.
I am actually in the minority on this within our party insofar as that I would go further. I don't even think Medicare for all is enough. I would prefer to see a UK-style national health service where everything is owned and operated by a department within the national government. The doctors, the nurses, the maintenance men, the sanitation workers, the people who wash sheets and bed pillows, and all, they all work for the National Health Service. I think it is quite possibly the best and arguably only way to completely eliminate the profit motive. and that it is the profit motive. It is capitalism, not small d democracy, that is the problem. Here it is capitalism. One of the great successes of the New Deal is that it highly regulated capitalism. I can also make an argument that it is, of all the countries on earth who have perfected capitalism, it may very well be the Chinese who have done it because of how desperately regulated capitalism is inside their country, followed closely by the Scandinavian and Western European countries, something that they all learned from us anyway. So I would fancy a national health service. I don't think that's ever coming here, so I would gladly take Medicare for all. But why is healthcare important to your generation, and what is the solution that you and your compatriots think is the right way to go?
Well, first of all, I believe that politicians need to stop having the ability to interfere with a few things in particular, one of which is insider trading. That needs to go immediately. Pertaining to the topic that you just mentioned, another thing that has to go is the fact that some of our biggest lobbying groups are pharmaceutical groups, and they are these big healthcare groups. Not only is healthcare for profit a lot of the times, it is ridiculously obscene what many of these hospitals and pharmaceutical industries are able to get away with. I believe what President Biden did with, I believe what President Biden has already done with healthcare, especially with insulin, has been fantastic. It's been a fantastic development. The fact that insulin, for example, can be produced at such a low cost and sold for such a high cost, and it costs people's lives. That is just one example out of many where the healthcare system is, failing its Hippocratic oath to do no harm. And to put it bluntly, it is failing that Hippocratic oath. As far as just hospitals at large go, I'm not sure if folks here are familiar with what they do, but they will put a Band-Aid on a patient, for example, and they could charge $30 for it. And there are many things like that where they are working under the assumption that your healthcare is going to pay for these services. And if you are someone who does not have healthcare or does not have good healthcare in this country, you are in a very bad situation. These hospitals should not be able to price gouge the way that they do, and they all do it, right? And I think that at the bare minimum, our government needs to be stopping accepting lobbying from pharmaceutical industries, from these healthcare, not pharmaceutical industries, pharmaceutical agencies and healthcare agencies. And they also need to be heavily regulating these hospitals to prevent them from doing that kind of price gouging as well.
I think to me that there's no industry, there's no business, because we don't have a healthcare system in this country. We have a health business. We have a health industry. That there is nothing more exemplary of the decadence and disintegration of capitalism than the health industry.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have the hospitals who are trying to extract wealth from the insurance companies, who are trying to extract wealth from the doctors, who are trying to extract wealth from their own customers through premiums, but then not covering anything. And it seems to be this rather incestuous type of circle, fill in a blank, where they're all trying to steal from each other, and that the skill of the industry isn't just the big insurance companies trying to figure out how not to cover anything, but this very masterful way that they're all stealing from each other. Mm-hmm. We all know that an aspirin doesn't cost $350, but if I am the Lehigh Valley Health Network or Geisinger or UPMC here in Pennsylvania, and I can't speak to the other hospital systems in other states, and I can figure out how to get Highmark to pay $350 for that aspirin, well, then I'm damn well going to do it. And probably the only reason that I stopped charging at $350 is because I can't get $351. And I don't know that there's anything more exemplary of what is wrong with capitalism than our health industry. And again, it would seem to me that the only way to solve any of it is to eliminate the profit motive, i.e., a national health system. But we're not going to get that. But I would take Medicare for all. I have told this story on the program a few times, folks. If you haven't heard it, you're going to suffer it again. The Koch brothers in 2016 conducted a study, paid for a study, commissioned, as the word I was looking for. I had a C. I was in there somewhere. Commissioned a study about the true costs, the quote-unquote true costs of Medicare for all, because they were convinced that at the end of the study they would see how much money it was going to cost and that everybody would hate it. Turns out their study proved that it would save well over $1 trillion a year in healthcare costs for the residents of the United States. It would save everyone money and would actually lower doctors' lower liabilities on the, suing doctors' standpoint. It would actually lower liabilities. So they tried to bury that study. They didn't even want you to know the truth. What a shocker. Billionaires didn't want you to know the truth. Except that Senator Sanders got a copy and publicized it. Now, it didn't get the coverage that it should, but the point is that Medicare for All saves money. It saves everyone money because it helps to cut in to that profit motive. It helps to alleviate the profit motive. It isn't always that these industries are broken. It's the capitalistic profit motive of it. The same way that we know that a bolt on an F-22 Raptor doesn't cost $1,000. It costs $1,000 because that's what the U.S. government will pay for it. Not because it actually costs that, but because it's what we'll pay. It would seem to me that your generation has embraced this idea perhaps more than any other. That, wow, you really shouldn't go broke when you get sick. But there's also a side of your generation that says, I'm healthy, so I don't need any of this, and this doesn't matter to me. How does that get bridged?
I think so. I will be realistic here. I think that nothing is going to change in the near future, given that our Congress, I believe, is loosely functional right now. I will say that is loosely functional Congress. I believe that my generation would be the next potential opportunity this country would have to move forward with something like healthcare for all, Medicaid for all. I think that we could actually expand that program, right? We could actually fully expand it to be universal healthcare. And the next opportunity that this country will realistically have to do that is when my generation starts getting elected. Now, there's already, a few prominent elected officials, one of them being a United States representative who was a member of my generation. For those who are, who have read over the Constitution, you can be a United States representative as early as the age of 25. So I would not yet be able to become a U.S. representative, but there are folks in my generation who actually are running right now. They have already been elected into those positions. And Jeff, I don't think that we're going to get anywhere any further or progress any further as far as healthcare goes until A, my generation starts getting elected. It is a fresh, clean group of people. And B, there needs to be a commitment that they won't be, that they won't be sold out to the pockets of these healthcare industry and these pharmaceutical agencies. And a lot of the time, we see even Democratic politicians who say one thing and then it comes out later that they are in the pockets of these lobbyists. Cory Booker from New Jersey is a prime example of that. He has been at some points an outspoken advocate, right, of providing better healthcare services to Americans. And he is very famously, he collaborates with these pharmaceutical lobbyists quite a bit, which is, as Jeff said, one of the one of the many groups that is driving this crisis. And so we first and foremost need politicians that start with the bare minimum and stop selling out to the people that are causing the problem. And then we could talk. We're going to get nowhere if we have people that are continuing to sell out for a quick buck and a campaign endorsement, right, to the groups that are harming our citizenry.
What has the war in Ukraine meant to your friends and colleagues? And if we were able to extrapolate to your generation as a whole, do you think it's meant as either as a comment on U.S. foreign policy or just a comment on the state of our planet generally? Because even the war on terror that you mentioned before has not. Second Iraq War, I guess, was a major ground war, but it really didn't take that long, did it? I mean, this is a proper World War II style 1,000-mile front European land-ground war. Even my generation didn't see that. We haven't seen war like this in the European continent since World War II. How is this resonating with you, with the other college Dems, with your demographic? Or is it?
So I think for the folks that, so I should say here, I should take the time here to say that my other degree is in international relations. So I certainly have kept up to date with what's going on in not only Ukraine, but also all across Europe related to this war. And the American foreign policy that has come out as a result of this war. I would say that's not necessarily the case unless it's someone like me who, takes maybe a particular interest in international relations, in American foreign policy. The college Democrats are also those people. I'm sure the college Republicans would also be. These are college-educated young people who have an interest in politics already, right? So they're going to have some kind of, not an advanced degree of knowledge, but at least some additional knowledge than maybe your other standard 23, 22, 21, 19-year-old, 20-year-old would have. And I say that because I haven't seen an awful lot of my generation talking about this. And to me, it also signifies that we, not only as young people, but I think just as Americans, we have a tendency to focus on what is right in front of us. And we sometimes have a bit of a difficulties not empathizing with, but really giving serious thought and consideration to things that aren't falling into our laps. Or really being able to understand things that don't personally impact us. I think one example of that as well is the fact that, good luck being a campaign and going to, for example, middle America in a country that's in the Midwest and talking to them, actually talking to them about immigration policy. Well, you would be a different situation if you were, say, talking to someone who lives in a border town about immigration. There are different issues, I think, that tend to matter differently to different groups of Americans in a different way. And with young people, this isn't a war where we've seen boots on the ground action for our generation. It's something that they would need to be educated on outside of anything that's personally impacting them, which there are people that are, right? I don't think many people understand the gravity of this and the responsibility that the United States has to defend democracy, on the global stage, and the responsibility that we do have. When all of this really started, with Crimea, I believe in 2014,
Mhm.
we were 10 to 15 years old, right? So this is not necessarily something that we would have an advanced degree of knowledge on, again, unless it was something that we were, actively invested in. I think a lot of young people were very invested in it when the war first, I shouldn't say broke out, because again, this really started in 2014. But when the invasion came to a head, right? I think it was something that young people said that they were invested in, and it's certainly fallen out of the limelight with a lot of young people. It's become this like hot topic issue. People who are on the right side of the spectrum tend to say that we should give them less aid, we should pull aid. People on the left just universally kind of say that we should, obviously stay there and continue giving aid and even bolster aid. And that's kind of where the conversation ends. Just to put it bluntly, there's not really any advanced discussion of what's going on or the repercussions this has in the global stage, or what our responsibility is as a beacon of democracy to help our ally and not help who we're not allied with. And I'm not sure if that was at all a ramble, or if I got
No,
you.
I think it's an honest answer that it's something. I think it's a much bigger story than it still is. I mean, obviously it was wall to wall war coverage for about the first month,
Yes.
and then it drifted, and we're seeing this rising sentiment from Republican office holders that the so-called party of national strong foreign policy, national defense, and God bless our troops and all that. A party that has become openly hostile to its own troops. We see what Senator Tuberville is doing, denying all these promotions in the Senate, and you have this growing wing of fascist nationalists who don't want to support the Ukraine any longer, and that if Russia just takes it, then that's fine too, because one can only really be led to, it's Occam's razor. You can only really be led to the conclusion that's because they're sympathetic to the Russians, and that they don't want to defend democracy. It's interesting, the dichotomy of us spending billions of dollars. And by the way, folks, I think the total amount of money that the United States has spent on this still has not reached $100 billion. And yet we spend 800 plus billion every single year on national defense. We haven't even scratched the yearly amount of money that we spend on national defense in what we have essentially donated in military support to Ukraine to defend itself. They have never once, by the way, asked us for troops. Never once. They have always maintained we will do the fighting. We just need what we need to do the fighting. And they are costing, and I can also make the argument, your studies would probably tell you this, that the very lukewarm response that came from the Obama administration to Crimea has led to this. I think you can draw that line. It's probably not the most popular point of view inside the Democratic Party, but I do think it is a true one. As we enter the final stretch here of the program, and you have been beyond kind with your time, you hang up anytime you want, and you always were welcome to do so. So we can, I will take this thing till 9, but you can beg out anytime that you wish. I want to talk about this almost as like a wrap up, so to speak. Even if I'm a little ahead of it, we'll be here till the top of the hour. But like I said, you beg out anytime you want. So this current administration, actually, you know what? Let me say one thing. Let me ask one question first before I get to this.
Shoot, go for it.
I'm lying. I guess now I got 2 questions. Joe Biden is 78 years old. He's a 78-year-old white male. Donald Trump is a 75-year-old orange male. I think there's white somewhere underneath. Not exactly emblematic of your generation. Mm-hmm. How do you keep people engaged in what is all likelihood going to be a general election with 2 figures that they really can't identify with? Is it, do you rely then, do you fall back on the, look, this is it. These are the two men running. You got to choose. And that the issues and the policy isn't going to stop just because you don't like these two men. Do you fall back on that? How do you engage folks to be involved in what's looking like a general election between two men that they probably really can't identify with?
Well, I don't think we're in an ideal situation. Biden's approval rating is extremely low amongst young people, and it's not necessarily a reflection of his own policies. It's, again, I said this a little while ago, that young people are in general fed up with institutions, right? And this has been proven by study after study or poll after poll. Young people are just wary of our government and of our political institutions, including the DNC, including President Biden and his campaign, right? Now, I'm a bit of a policy wonk, so I personally would probably find myself in the minority of young people here by saying that I actually quite like what he's done. I think he has been actually policy-wise a phenomenal president. As far as being able to relate to him, I mean, I'm from the same hometown. We've got the same roots, you know. Our families are from the same town in Ireland. So all jokes aside, though, I will say it is a genuine problem, right? That young people are not going to be able to see themselves in either of these two candidates. God willing, if this next election goes as planned and our country makes it through another presidency, which I believe it will. I just, just to say that, if we hopefully make the best choice possible, the DNC and the RNC need to emphatically move away from people who are pushing 80 years old and move to maybe 50, something around that age, where it's a happy medium. I would say that. I know the DNC had at one point been making it seem, I believe, as though they were favoring Gavin Newsom. I think that's also a mistake. It needs to be, for the Democrats at least, a younger person who is not from a solidly blue state. They need to be from a swing state, right? If anyone here is from California, I know you guys typically end up electing Democrats almost everywhere. Not everywhere, but in many places. I would consider you to be a very solidly blue state. In places like Pennsylvania.
Certainly in statewide offices, yeah.
Mm-hmm. In places like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Wisconsin, right? Nevada, you have battleground states. These are states where it's a toss-up.
Arizona, New Mexico.
New Mexico, right? And Michigan is another one.
Yep.
And
to a point, I'd say, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the thing about those is I think, just speaking on the Democratic Party, I know that they had made it seem like they were interested in Gavin Newsom at one point. I don't think somebody from California is necessarily electable in those more kind of purple areas. They're absolutely toss-ups. And in many of these places, they are more traditional, more moderate Democrats who do live there than you would find in, say, San Francisco or Los Angeles. But that's kind of a non sequitur. I don't even know how I got onto that. But to answer your question, after the next election, which, like you said, looks like it's going to be a primary between two men of the same age, both closing in on 8 years old. After this election, the DNC and the RNC both need to return themselves to a time where that was not the norm. Our governing body is absolutely aging, and it's not to say that these people are incapable of being incredible legislators and incredible leaders. There are folks who are of that age, right? That are fantastic legislators, and they have dedicated their whole lives to protecting and preserving and upkeeping our republic, right? And there are others, there are several, members, even who are elected officials in our House of Representatives and Senate, who are of that age that probably should have retired a long time ago. And something that we're seeing right now is, instead of there being a balance between people of that age group and of young people, you see the old guard kind of refusing to step down. And this younger generation that historically had been getting involved right around this time, at 30 years old, at 27 years old, at 35 years old, they're unable to do that, because over the years we have somehow, as a nation, come to an understanding that an incumbency is a lifetime appointment, right? Once you are an incumbent,
The founders never meant Congress to be a full-time job or a lifetime job.
No, exactly what you just said. And I mean, to put it, to say something that is not often said, that I think should be said more truthfully, the country was founded by young people. And I think that there's a lot of folks today. I see someone in the comments very quickly just mentioned Pennsylvania's own Governor Josh Shapiro. I personally think he would be a perfect candidate for the Democratic Party to pick in the future. He's from a swing state. He's incredibly fantastic public speaker. He almost reminds me of Obama sometimes when he does speak. I think he's a beautiful public speaker, and he gets shit done, to put it very bluntly, which is very refreshing to see in government, right?
I wanted to point to the boss's question there in the chat, as she tries to keep control of the dogs downstairs.
Yeah.
When you talk to your peers, how do they feel about the legacy of Barack Obama?
Okay. So it depends entirely on what you mean by my peers. Because I think depending on which group of young people, you would get a very different response on how they view Barack Obama and his legacy. So I would say a lot of young moderate Democrats, and I actually have one of his, I believe, 2008 campaign posters back there. I was an elementary schooler, so this is a College Students for Obama poster, and I certainly was not in college when that happened. But speaking with some moderate or, maybe more old-fashioned, younger Democrats, they very much look up to Barack Obama as somebody who, was a beacon of hope. He accomplished a great deal for our nation. And then if you speak to younger progressives, they absolutely do not feel that way. Something that is said very frequently by young progressives is that Obama was a war criminal, which, of course, any president would be, given the fact that they're saying that because he, engaged, he was commander-in-chief, was president during times of war. His administration, yes, carried out drone strikes. They did kill innocent civilians. Every president has, very unfortunately, their administrations have engaged in that. And what you will find is a lot of younger progressives don't seem to be able to separate that from the rest of the things that his administration did. So I would say it depends entirely on which peers I'm talking to, because the young progressives do not like Barack Obama. I would say a lot of the young moderates, or people who, they might be more well-versed in what happens at that level of the presidency, at that level of government, and seem to have an understanding that it is an unfortunate reality that all of our presidents have done something like this. I think they will be much more forgiving to his legacy.
Follow-up question from the boss. You probably saw it there in the chat. As an older millennial, I have always felt, older meaning that she's 24, I have always felt like the Republican Party thinks that we'll wise up one day and become conservative. I think you and I talked about this early on in the program. Reality is that nothing in their platform speaks to the concerns or challenges that young people are facing. It feels like they have metaphorically, I would say quite literally, to be honest, flipped the middle finger, if you will, to young people. Curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so we chatted a little bit about this earlier. I think that the interesting thing, and I'll actually just reiterate what I said earlier because I do think it's very interesting. A lot of younger conservatives seem to agree on some things related to policy that young liberals do, which is not necessarily something that we've really seen happen in the past to the extent that it's happening today. For example, over half of my entire generation believes that climate change could be attributed to human involvement. Um, let me just very quickly pull up this statistic so I don't say the wrong thing. If you would mind giving me a minute.
No worries. It's funny. I've already been asked by Randall for running over 9 o'clock. Since there's no new villain's view, we just may, but it won't be for long, and it won't be a plan. We just might spill over a tiny bit, a little too much water in the glass, if you will. Go Absolutely. Ahead when you're ready.
I am all ready. I just didn't want to say the wrong thing. So roughly 2/3 of the entire generation recognize racial inequality as being a significant political issue that is currently facing America. And what the interesting thing is that these issues in my generation are not divided along partisan lines. When you get to the older generations, they are. A few more examples. Nearly half of Republican members of Gen Z that were polled by Pew Research in a massive poll consisting of tens of thousands of respondents about the generation. Those who responded said that Black Americans face racial discrimination and inequality in America, and also that they were much more likely to support the legalization of recreational marijuana, and that the government should, quote, do more to solve problems, end quote, and that their generation was more accepting of gay Americans. I mention these issues in particular because they really stuck out to me as I was reading that Pew Research poll and that the results of it. These are issues that may be commonly held amongst my generation. They absolutely are a partisan divide amongst an older generation. So I think that a lot of young conservatives who are self-identifying as Republicans today, I do believe that if they stay in their party, that will end up transforming or changing the party in the future, right? These are not currently held beliefs by members of that party who are elected officials. They just are not, right? And the fact that we have a substantial number of young Americans who identify proudly as being Republican, as being conservative, who seem to agree on these issues of, human rights. And let's put it bluntly here, right? This is not to say that these people are Democrats or they are liberals, right? The reason why I said gay Americans, for example, and not LGBTQ plus Americans is because in that same poll, young conservatives were still much less likely to be accepting of transgender individuals than their liberal counterparts were, right? So I'm not trying to sit here and say that young people everywhere believe the same things. I do just want to point out that we are seeing some unusual agreements between young people across the aisle. And I think that as long as young Republicans do not abandon the party, as you said in your comment, that it feels like they have, quote, metaphorically flipped the finger to, right? As long as they don't abandon that party, I would hypothesize that we're going to see a shift in how that party operates sometime in the not so distant future.
Let me get to what was originally my second to last question.
Mm-hmm.
Democrats consistently, when we look inside our own house, will say, God, we suck at messaging.
Mm-hmm.
As you mentioned, the Biden administration's record for accomplishment in passing legislation and truly meaningful legislation, not renaming post offices and bridges or airports or whatever,
mm-hmm.
has been properly impressive. Whether you agree with all of it or not is irrelevant. It's been a tremendous record of passing genuine legislation. And not to mention, if we how quickly we have forgotten the very beginning of this administration, where it seemed its nearly sole function was to vaccinate the country.
Mm-hmm.
We seem to forget that, as if it was somehow, decades ago. It was only a couple of years ago. That said, the limited amount of student debt that's been alleviated, $1 trillion for infrastructure, $400 billion investment in greening the economy and to address climate change. The rebuilding and expanding NATO. The first woman of color on the Supreme Court. And I could go on and on and on. There's, small business relief and just so many things to get us out of the pandemic and to try to restore the economy coming out of the pandemic, keep people in their homes. Just there's a litany of things. But it seems that the number one thing is that we eat our own as far as, oh, yeah, but he's going to be 80.
Mm-hmm.
How do we and how do young people, as arguably a flagship of this old boat, stand up and say, this is what we've done? Why are we not out there really, really just tooting our own horn about what we've done?
I mean,
do we always have to look? Do we always have to be the ones that look for the hole at the bottom of the boat? Oh yeah, but he's 80. But this is the most progressive legislation and administration since Johnson, if not Roosevelt. So why can't we talk about that? Why are we so bad at talking about what we've done? Oh, not to mention, I don't know, the little thing called stabilizing the democracy.
So I will say a few things. I, for one, myself, will be very happy and enthusiastic to cast a second vote for my fellow scrappy kid from Scranton. I will be very happy to do so. I know many young people do not feel that way. So I think we can chalk this up to a few things. Many people, myself included, were actually expecting him when he was elected to be a do-nothing president, right? We have that, for those who might be familiar with American history, we had this sequence of presidents following the Civil War who did a very good job doing a whole lot of nothing, which stabilized the country.
I would argue leading up into it as well.
Yes. And it's stabilized the country after its darkest hour, right? And so at the end of Donald Trump's presidency, things got very ugly for our country. And then you had the fact that we had a president who shirked the keystone of our democracy, which is the peaceful transition of power, quite literally the glue that holds the foundation of our democracy together. That was not a great end to the administration, by all means. On January 6th, we all know what happened, the day that the election results were due to be certified. Joe Biden came into the presidency in, I would truthfully argue, America's second darkest hour, right? It wasn't one particular thing that was at stake. It was everything at stake. You had democracy once again on the chopping block. And so I, like many others, fully anticipated Joe Biden to be a do-nothing president, just the way that those following the Civil War had a responsibility to calm the waters and still the waters. And he far exceeded my expectations, I could say. Again, I will be proud to cast a second vote for this man. I think he probably is the most progressive president that we've had since FDR. I would be comfortable saying that right now, and I'd give it a bit more thought. Maybe I'll reel it back eventually, but right now I'm comfortable saying that, right? He's accomplished a great deal, and much of that has not just been for his own party. He's truly, I believe, a president for all Americans. And he has been. I see some people in the comments mentioning, he's pro-union as well. He has done wonders for our working class Americans with the CHIPS Act as well, and bolstering the American economy and making sure that we put American jobs first. And I think that it is fantastic, the work that he's done, not only on the social front, but also on the financial front, also on the infrastructure front, with all that he's done with the IRA. And I think the biggest problem that he is going to face is his age. I will say one thing about my generation, and it is that our voters tend to very much like identity politics, right? And say what you will of it, but for those who aren't familiar with that term, it would be, wanting to support or vote someone that looks like you. It's not just someone who thinks like you, like a platform voter, but it would be someone that you can relate to, right? So if, and this is a bit of a silly example, right? But I am a white 23-year-old Catholic woman. So if there is somebody running for a position, any position, and she is a white 23-year-old Catholic woman, this would hold that I would be, more favorable over her than her opponent, even if her opponent has accomplished, a great deal, or maybe agrees with my ideology a little bit more. So to have a generation that does favor this type of politicking, right? Joe Biden is not relatable in that way, in that regard, to many people in this generation. And I think his campaign and the DNC are going to have a bit of an uphill battle combating that, right? There's very little that people can relate to from my generation as far as identity politics go, with a man who is, nearing 80, who belongs to a generation that they don't belong to. And he's been a career politician since before their parents were born, right? I want to make that clear. Most of our parents were not yet born when Joe Biden was getting involved in politics.
Since the early 70s, yeah. 70, I think he first got elected to the Senate in 74, if I'm not mistaken.
My mother was born in 1972, to give some context. So right before that, right? And I'm on the older end of Gen Z. So for my younger peers in my generation, he's not all that relatable if they are going to be voting based on something like identity politics. I think the campaign really needs to focus on all of the great work that he's done and shy away from, actually, not shy away. I think they need to be very upfront with the fact that he does not look like them, and he's not the same age as them, and he's most certainly not the same generation as them, but that he is still the candidate that has their best interests in mind. And I think that the campaign needs to take a very aggressive approach with young people. One additional thing that I will add on as well is that I don't see campaigns prioritizing young people. I've worked on campaigns before, and the youth vote is not typically anything but an afterthought as to how they can mobilize, voters in an area. And I think that the Biden campaign, if they are smart about this, needs to take a very forward and aggressive approach over the youth vote, right? They can't just treat us like an afterthought. Within the next 6 years, this generation makes up over 60%, including millennials, I should add, of the entire electorate. The entire electorate. My generation has been the only youth generation to vote at rates this high since the right to vote was given to 18-year-olds in 1971, right? And so you have a generation that wants to vote. You just need to convince them to vote for your candidate, and you need to get them to the polls again, because it's also a generation that is very wary of trusting our institutions. So this is not something passive. Just as Ben Franklin told the woman on the steps of Independence Hall that we have a republic if we can keep it, we have a president if we can keep it. All right. We cannot passively ignore the young voters. Just as Ben Franklin spoke about our republic, saying that we need an electorate that is engaged. We need to make sure everyone is included. Everyone cares and has a stake in this republic, right? If you can keep it, we have one. This is how the Biden campaign needs to view civic engagement. They have a president if you can keep him. So they need to engage the youth vote, cannot passively be done.
I believe it was Jefferson that said you can have a democracy or an ill-informed electorate, but you cannot have both.
Yes.
And I'm sure I butchered that as well. 267-227-9189. Randall, I know you want to call in, 267-227-9189. But before I forget, it doesn't have to be the last question, but if you want to go to bed, you certainly can. But I do want to ask you this. Even though the young are generally speaking more hopeful than other generations, what gives you hope? What makes you hopeful? When you see a January 6th, or you see a Trump, his poll numbers go up after 4 indictments in 4 jurisdictions and 91 felony counts, and you see his popularity go up, what gives you hope?
I said it before, and I will say it again. When I think of Americans and who we fundamentally are, right, as a people, I think of perseverance. I think of the poem that's etched on the base of the Statue of Liberty that greeted all of our ancestors coming over, right? Give us your huddled masses yearning to breathe.
I'm just listening, Jeff.
I know. Hang on a sec.
Give us your wretched
I can't
refuse.
hear her.
I know, brother, but everybody else is listening to you while she's talking.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Give me a sec.
So when I think of what makes us Americans, I think of that, right? I think of that perseverance, that boldness, that defiance, that when the going gets tough, we get tougher. And that's what keeps me going, because America has made it through some very dark times, right? This is getting there. Absolutely. I will not sugarcoat it. We are getting to one of our darkest times in the annals of our American history. But we keep fighting and we keep persevering, and that's what makes us Americans, and that's what's going to get us through this. We need everybody, does not matter what party you belong to stand up for democracy, stand up for the republic. And if we can do that, that's what keeps me going, right? We persevere. We get tougher than the times we're going through.
My dear friend, who I'm glad is here following his concert after he was out partying up and being irresponsible, not listening to the show today. I'm kidding, of course. Out there
I took my grandson.
at the concert, Randall has called in. We are going past 9 o'clock, which was not the plan. But since there is no new Villain's View, we'll spill over the cup just a little bit. Not planning this. We will end up pretty soon. We're not going to 9:30 or 10 or anything like that. But Randall, just remember, please, before I let you take over the airwaves here, Kate, Randall, you will hear Randall. He will not be able to hear you. The phone software still, I cannot get it integrated with Restream. I'm literally holding up my cell phone to the microphone. So you will hear him. He will not hear you, but I will let you, my dear friend, ask your question, ask away. Phone line, you called, so it's all yours.
Jeff, can you hear me correctly?
Absolutely.
Okay. Kate, shake your head yes or no if you can hear me correctly. Oh, she can't hear me. I'm
She
sorry.
can. She can. Go ahead.
Okay. Kate, I've been a local Democratic Committee elected person here in Delaware County, south east, outside Philadelphia, for, I think around 45 years. So, anyway, my
my 3 daughters are all millenniums in their 30s, upper 30s to mid 30s, and they're all married. They have kids. Um, they've been able to buy their houses. They're still paying off their student loans, but I work for tuition remission, which is free tuition, and I got my oldest daughter her master's in ed for free. So they are special, even though I'm like probably lower middle class. But in any case, they still had student loans because if they wanted to live at college, room and board, they had to take loans out, and they did versus living at home. From all of her college friends, and I'm massively Facebook on her college friends because I worked there during that time period before I retired. They're all heavily Democrat, and they're all going to vote in November. But that's the millennium generation, not your generation, not Z generation. And it's been interesting to hear you speak about your peer group, your generation peer group, on, excuse me, that they don't know our history, our true history. They don't know what's really going on in world politics, let alone economics in this country. I don't know how to reach out to them. I can reach out to millenniums, and I can go door to door here in my precinct and talk to millenniums. They're buying houses up from everybody's dying off my street for old age. But I can't talk. I don't know how to talk to your Z generation. Mm-hmm. And I'm gonna end this phone call so I can hear your reply on Jeff's the Kennedy effect, because I'm really, really curious. How can we as Democrats, as active Democrats, mm-hmm. Jeff, you, me, how can we reach out to your generation to vote? And this year in PA, hey, all school boards are up. Moms for Liberty are running across the board to kill ban book and everything else. Mm-hmm. We got a Supreme Court here in PA that will be decided majority Democrat or Republican in November. We've got county councils. We've got local municipality elections this year, and then next year, of course, we've got national. How can we reach out to your generation? I'm going to hang up and so I can turn this back on the feed and hear your reply. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Yeah, and listen, you take care of yourself this week. I know you've been having he's been having some health issues. You take care of yourself. We don't have that many listeners that I can lose any. One means a lot. So anyway, Kate, please.
So, I mean, this would not be something for any individual person to do. This would more so be something for a campaign to do. But the first thing I would recommend is if you see any campaigns in your area, really encourage and press them. I know someone in the comments had said that they actually wrote to the White House advising the current president to prioritize his younger support, right? Do that to campaigns. If there is any campaign that you have any personal connection to, even if you are just volunteering, tell them they need to mobilize the youth vote. And I can be found on Facebook. I believe Jeff tagged me in the post to this. So if anyone needs any assistance, coming up with a one-pager to give to those campaigns as to the importance of the youth vote and why they should be prioritizing it, I am happy to send you whatever info you need, but push and pressure those campaigns. The second thing is utilize the social networks that young people are using, right? So that might be college campuses or college clubs. Ask to speak to a political club at a campus. See if they need any help actually, registering young voters, mobilizing young voters. Try to not prioritize, try to get these young people in the areas where they are most comfortable, right? So that would be a college club, for example. Or if you have social media, utilizing social media, posting voter registration information, making sure that, if you have a daughter, you have a son who's around that age, maybe they're a little bit more social media savvy than even you might be. Encourage them to actually go out and do this and take to the fronts of social media. That is where a lot of young people, the vast majority of actually, have reported that they get their information about politics and about civic education and engagement. So that would be another fantastic place to be encouraging young people to get involved. If you have the link to voter registration, that's fantastic. Post it in your Facebook story. If you have Instagram or Twitter, post it to your stories there and make sure that young people who are clicking through can see it, and that might help them register themselves or register a friend.
It shouldn't be hard. No, it shouldn't be. And I want to say this to you before we say goodnight. And that is, I very much look forward to, not if, but when you run for something, being a senior advisor on your campaign. And when I mean senior, I mean old. Not senior in experience, but just senior in old. Senior as in white-haired, got my AARP card senior. I look forward to being that senior advisor on, because you will run for something, or at least I hope so. Because as you stated, things don't generally change for a generation until that generation is represented. Maxwell Frost, the 25-year-old congressperson from Florida, is an amazing, amazing example. But he is quite lonely. He is not serving in the House with even 5 others like him, let alone 10 or 20 or 50 or 100. He is a singular, unique individual. On a national level, there are state legislators like him all across the country, thank goodness. And there are council people and mayors and school board members like him all across the country. And I know that. But I do agree with you that only when these folks, your folks, reach the higher and highest levels of power, do things change. There's a reason why Social Security was always considered to be the third rail of politics, because seniors vote in tremendous numbers. And the most conservative among them, or self-identified conservative among them, love Social Security. It's interesting that I've told the story many times on here that if you think back and you look back at some of the old clips of when Trump was first running in 2016, it was Bernie Sanders' platform. We're not just going to make Social Security solvent, we're going to expand it. We're not going to just improve on healthcare, we're going to make it cheaper and better. We're going to tax people like me. And then he turned around and gave himself a big, huge tax cut, over about $9 trillion worth. Mm-hmm. So, and I think these are astronomical, dollar amounts that'll never be paid back anyway. I think money is largely up here now at this point. When you can just tap a card on a machine, I think money's sort of it's almost a non-factor. But when you run for something, I hope to be the old guy in the room, sitting in the corner, leaning on my cane, telling some young whippersnapper to go get me a tea or something like that. Say, adding my adding my 2 pence, if you will. Any final thoughts that you wanted to share with anybody? I mean, 3+ hours is beyond gracious. But if there's any final thoughts, any issues that we didn't get to touch on, any answers that you didn't think you got to thoroughly suss out, how do people follow you, or wherever that you're comfortable having them follow you on social media? Any of that, I just want to turn the floor over to you, please.
I would say, so if folks would like to reach me at all, I have not used Facebook in an awful long time, but I am I put my generation to shame. I'm a bit social media unsavvy, but I only actually use one form of social media, but I'm trying to get back into Facebook. I believe Jeff had tagged my Facebook account. And I mean, if anyone would like to reach out to me there, you are absolutely more than welcome to. I would love chatting to any of you. And I do not believe that I'm in the Facebook group yet because I don't use Facebook, but I will be certain to join after tonight. And once again, I'm very happy to chat with anyone. So if you are in that Facebook group, I will send a message once I've joined and you can reach me there. And outside of that, Jeff, I don't have any final thoughts. But, I am very happy to chat with anyone if anyone does feel so inclined to reach out to me once I, get over to Facebook. And you'll see when I'll drop a message in the group.
Well, let me give you the obligatory bad news as we set you
Okay.
free for the rest of your evening anyway. And before I wrap up here myself, but we send you back into the wild, so to speak. Let me give you the obligatory bad news, and that is you're part of the family now. And that
Okay.
means you have the keys to the castle. You are welcome back here anytime, either on your own with your colleagues, part of a round table when we have our anniversary shows, are just kind of vague, no topic sort of whoever shows up, shows, those kind of things. You are always, always, always welcome here. If you have anything that you want to share with my audience, and it certainly doesn't have to be for 3.5 hours. It can be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it might be, something you think that my audience needs to know, then you are always, always welcome here. And I know that I'm going to see you this weekend, but for the context of our program, I desperately, desperately hope that this is not the only time that we see you, and that you come back and you see us again when it is convenient. And again, if there's something important that you think we need to know, just know that you are always, always welcome here. We'd like to consider our program a family from our very first guest 4.5 years ago up till now. You're always, always welcome here. And I'm eternally grateful for you taking this much time. It's a long show. But taking this much time to talk to us and taking phone calls and comments and the whole 9 yards, I'm eternally grateful. And, if you're not going to be president at some point, then you might want to consider doing this. So maybe we'll hand this off to you. I'm going to hand this program off to somebody. I don't know who yet, but I'm going to hand it off to somebody at some point. But you'll consider. But I'll see you this weekend anyway. But as I said, for the context of the program, I am beyond grateful. I very, very much appreciate all your time and your thoughts and your expertise and your eloquence. And yeah, it's your generation has to give, among the many jobs that your generation has, unfortunately, some that you shouldn't have to have, burdens that perhaps you shouldn't have to carry. Among them is that you have to give generations like mine hope. We were the last New Deal generation. And, I had my higher education taken from me by Reaganism. So we were the last New Deal generation. We knew what it was like, and we had it all taken. So we do have to look. We're 40 plus years into it, and we haven't solved it yet. And unfortunately, our party hasn't done enough to solve it yet either. So it is going to be generations like yours that's going to have to restore it. We're going to have to restore this nation. And it's not a bad thing It's not a bad thing all the time. Politicians, I often say politicians very rarely get on the soapbox and say, we need to go back to the past, right? They always talk about moving ahead and going to the future. Well, you know what? The past isn't so bad when it worked.
Mm-hmm.
And it did. Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive. Jefferson and Madison were progressives. We had a Democratic socialist as a president. He got elected 4 times. The Republicans hated it so much they had to change the Constitution to make sure it never happened again. The New Deal didn't just save the American economy, it saved the world's economy. It saved democracies, because when economies collapse, democracy goes right past it, goes right behind it. It saved democracies. It defeated fascism. Progressivism put a man on the moon and created the Peace Corps. And it gave voting rights and civil rights to populations in this country that never had them before. So we know what we're doing. And we have to not be afraid to sometimes look backward before we look forward. And unfortunately, among the many burdens that your generation is going to carry, that's going to be one of them, is to restore this country, not just fix it. A country, remember, it's a more perfect union, presupposing the fact that it will never be perfect, that we will always strive for that bar will always move. But to restore the promise of this country that was given it, especially at its height, after the New Deal, after the Great Republican Great Depression, during the New Deal, after the war, it can all be restored. So thank you very much for being here. I owe you a really big coffee or something, beverage or pizza of your choice over the weekend. I look forward to seeing you, and you are always, always, always welcome here.
Well, I am so honored to have been invited on here and to get that, familial invite. Everybody here is welcome to bother me at any point. Again, you can find me through that Facebook group, or if you do not have Facebook, I'm sure you can Google the Pennsylvania College Democrats. I believe we have a website. I should be on it, so you can get my info there. And I am very happy to help out with anyone who is in the state. And if anybody just generally needs advice on anything related to youth civic engagement elsewhere, I'm also happy to provide that. But Jeff, thank you so much for having me on. It has been a wonderful 3.5 hours, and I hope I didn't, talk everyone's ear off.
Not at all. That's what we're here for. Extended conversations is one of the strengths of the program. It's not 5-minute sound bites. We dig deep. So thanks so much. Go get a bowl of ice cream or something.
All right. Have a fantastic night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, Kate. That is Kait Ahern, president of the Pennsylvania College Democrats. So we are a bit over our time. We are about 9 minutes away from the bottom of the hour. So we'll wrap up a couple of things here just to go to 9:30. I don't know if it's like an OCD thing of mine. I hate ending on weird minutes, like 9:37 or 9:21 right now. I don't know. It's a very weird thing. I can't explain it. It's just a thing. I don't know if it's a weird sort of OCD thing. I don't know what it is. There is something I did want to mention, though, that happened this week, and I think it's very important. And I think it's a very, very important thing for someone like me to talk about. Because I am, I would say that I'm non-partisanly optimistic about things. I want there to be a functioning Republican Party. Hell, I wouldn't mind if there were 6 functional parties in this country. I think one of the strengths of a parliamentary system is the number of parties in it. I think it's a strength of that system. I do think the president of the United States should have to go down into the well of Congress and take questions, the same way that a prime minister has to take questions in a parliamentary system. And I think that one of the strengths of a democracy, a small d democracy, is that partisans need to be honest. and they need to be honest when their own party does something terribly, terribly wrong. We need to be able to talk about it. Well, that is what I want to bring up now as we wrap up the program. This weekend, Democratic senator, the senior senator from my home state of New Jersey, Robert Menendez, was indicted again for bribery and corruption charges. Gold coins and gold bars were found hidden in his home that was raided by the FBI. Suit jackets of his that were hidden in closets buried behind, layers of other clothes, with pockets stuffed with cash. Now, I never once voted for Bob Menendez when I was living in New Jersey. I have always felt that he was dirty and crooked and on the take. Always. From the time he entered the House of Representatives, I thought he was dirty and on the take. He's been indicted before, and the only way on corruption charges, and the only way he got out of it was because of a hung jury. Bob Menendez is a dirty, dirty, dirty politician. And he needs to resign. But then, all too often in our politics, when the office holder resigns, all the charges go away. That can't happen here. Not only should he resign immediately, he's already said he won't, but he should. If he were to resign immediately, the Justice Department needs to continue and follow through its prosecution of him. He doesn't get to walk away just because he resigns. Oh, by the way, isn't it funny? I haven't heard a single Republican bitch about the weaponization of the Department of Justice when it comes to Bob Menendez. Why is that? Because their arguments about the weaponization of the Department of Justice are all bullshit. When the DOJ prosecutes one of their own, then the entirety of the DOJ is crooked. When they prosecute Democrats, we stand silent. I am thrilled to have learned about this investigation into Bob Menendez. I don't care if it's a Republican, a Democrat, a Green, Labor, Tory, Communist, Socialist. I don't care what party affiliation label you place upon yourself. If you are dirty and crooked, you need to be investigated, caught, prosecuted, and jailed. The man belongs in federal prison. He is crooked and has been for a long time. I don't care what party he's in. I am thrilled to have learned about this investigation. I'm thrilled to have learned about this indictment, and I hope he is prosecuted and found guilty. He should have been found guilty last time, because he was. Only a hung jury let him off. He's dirty and corrupt. And no matter what party label you put on yourself, that's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. We should be better than that. So I'm thrilled to hear about this. I am not hurt or wounded that a fellow Democrat was indicted. I'm not going to make excuses for him just because he is a Democrat. When you're dirty, you're dirty. And these fake fascist Republicans should look themselves in the mirror. They'll continue to go out there and cry and whine and bitch about the weaponization of the Department of Justice. You had nothing to say when Bob Menendez was indicted, because he should be. So be careful what you wish for. I'm thrilled by it. I'm genuinely happy to hear about it. When the news alerts came across my phone, I was thrilled to see it. Happy. I smiled. I giggled. He's been dirty for a long, long time. If you came from Jersey like I did, if you lived in Northeast Jersey, in the New York market, where you knew where Bob Menendez lived, you knew how dirty he was. It was an open secret in New Jersey Democratic politics. But with power comes money, and with money comes power. He had it, and he used it, and he kept himself out of jail. Well, not anymore. Good. I would say there's probably a good chance that this investigation goes back into the Trump administration's Department of Justice. And if it started there, great. I have no problem with it, because it looks like they got it spot on. When the FBI raided his home and found all that, it justified everything. And I think that's an important distinction between the Democratic Party and the former political party known as Republicans. This Democrat, this progressive Democrat, is happy he was indicted because he broke the law. I look forward to the prosecution and the trial. There's no place for corruption. It doesn't belong in our system. And that's a big difference between the two parties. A big difference. That does it for us for this week. The Kennedy Effect for the 24th of September. If you missed any of the program, please go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/thatothersideofinformation. Just like our Facebook group, That Other Side of Information, the show will be there as well. I did eventually get to share the program everywhere else that I wanted to share it. That Other Side of Information on Facebook. Remember, the Facebook group never closes. We are always there. No new Villain's View tonight. That's why I am here till 9:30. It wasn't my plan, but hey, it went okay. Villain's View will return next week, to the best of my knowledge. Next week for us, we will not be with you. We will return on October 8th. I will be on the road next week at the Democratic State Committee meeting. So I will be traveling and recovering from that whenever I get home. So no new show for us next week. We return on October 8th. I am pretty certain the Villain's View will return next week, October 1st. So thank you, everyone who had anything to do with the program. For everyone at TCP, Marquise Whitney, Andrew and Taekwon, to everyone at hot101.net. Thank you so very much. It means the world to us to continue to be part of the hot101.net family. It truly does. I'm not blowing smoke up anybody. It's the truth. It means a great, great deal to me to be part of this family. And to have you all around the world listen to us, easy for me to say, as part of the hot101.net family. Please check out hot101.net, not just when we're on, but all the time. There are truly good, decent human beings who occupy the space on hot101.net, and they are talented beyond belief. So please check them out. And also, our sponsors at the PayGive app, paygive.org, www.paygive.org, and the PayGive app. You have to pay for things. Why not give while you do it? For Lynn and George Dare, and of course for April Riddick, and for barking dogs downstairs, and of course my infinitely better half, my much, much, much better half, Kristen, and of course my dear I say new still, even though we've known each other a little while, new friend, and now becoming, of course, an increasingly closer friend, Kait Ahern. Thanks for being with us this evening. That's us. That's about all the damage we can do for 1 week. So let's just say goodnight. And of course, to all of you out there, every single individual, again, if you missed anything, youtube.com, but also please take care of yourselves and each other. For the Kennedy Effect, I'm Jeff Kennedy. We will see you on October the 8th. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other.